The following podcast is brought to you by CDKOffers.com. Use offer code DIESHRINK for 3% off everything on the website and Broken Silicon for 25% off all Windows codes. All right, on with the show. And welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and I am joined, as always, every other week by my co-host,
Dan. And some would say that's about half the time, not always every other week. But
well, what's wrong with what I said?
You said always, always every other week. I don't know. It sounds funny to me.
You are always on the podcast every other week. So every 2 weeks, you are always on, Dan. This isn't the same as saying it works 60% of the time every time. This isn't exactly the same as that. I would say it's very close to a statement like that, like from Anchorman, but it is not. This is not like the Sex Panther statement where he goes, it works
60% of the time, it works every time.
Yeah, this is not quite that, Dan. And I stand by it.
Okay.
But welcome to Broken Silicon, the 23rd most popular podcast in Denmark, which I think is funny that it shot up so much in that country in the past couple weeks, considering so many people in Denmark had pitchforks raised at us a couple weeks ago. Also, number 5 tech podcast in Costa Rica, which we were just the only competition we had were Spanish-speaking primarily podcasts there. So,
hell yeah.
I mean, I think we can... Besides, I think, a default Apple technology podcast or something, I couldn't figure it out. I think we might be the number 1 English-speaking tech podcast in Costa Rica, which maybe I just listed a dozen qualifiers, but Dan, we're getting there.
That's a hell of a niche you can have carved out in the year 2020.
Number 1, baby.
Hell yeah.
And I guess besides that, I just say thanks to the patrons for the contributions to the last Die Shrink. Those discussions on when an $800 GPU is worth it instead of $400 and just when it's ever worth it to spend extra on do-it-yourself components, which was, I think, a good Die Shrink to have come out at the launch of the $1,000 6900 XT. You know, the reasonably priced 6900 XT next to the 3090.
It does look reasonable next to the 3090. I don't know if that means it's reasonable, but...
Well, that will be, of course, a major part of this podcast, which did come out like at most half a day late, just so we could, at least in the free feeds, so that we could cover the 6900 XT launch. There's a lot I have to say about that, as usual. But first, let us get in to some business here. BS Steiner 69 writes in and says, "Hi, Tom. Since Off Topic channel was removed from the Discord, are you going to create a Space Nerd channel for faceplants and others to hype SpaceX and aerospace knowledge?" So the reason I put this here is just kind of to catapult into just kind of a greater thing to bring up about the community. At the start, I'd usually put this at the end of the podcast, but I think it's important, so it's worth putting at the beginning, which is I removed the off-topic channel in the Moore's Law is Dead Discord, which you get access to at the proper, tiers if you support us on Patreon. And it was simply because I would every now and then it was just turning into hostile political debates, and I started thinking about and brainstorming with the higher end. Or not higher end, the top end members and what do I want to say, moderators, about what the best solution would be. And as I started coming up with the rules, I went, or I could just remove it.
Yeah.
And I came to the decision to just remove the off-topic channel. And it's because, and I've had to make these decisions many times as we grow the Moore's Law is Dead community, which is 5 times bigger than it was at the beginning of this year, literally. And that's, I think you go into these forks in the road anytime you're a creator building a community, and you have to decide, are we going to try to turn this into a bigger social club eventually? Or are we going to decide this is our piece of content and make it more manageable? And I think that's what I'm going to decide to do most of the time. And I stated this in the Discord, if you want to argue about politics, go to Reddit. But my Discord will not turn into and I've seen this in so many other tech Discords and Patreons and forums where it's like, eventually they just add these categories for a ton of things that aren't even tangentially related. And you go, do you need to support that? Because I think in this community, you should be able to come here. We're not going to shy away from talking about politics when it's related to the things that impact gaming hardware and gaming. But I'm certainly not going to be one of those people that's afraid to talk about it when it is on topic. But at the same time, I don't think you need to have everything and everything. And I think most people come here to just hear us talk about the 6900 XT and the latest games, and that really no one's paying for a political discussion channel.
I mean, if you want to have arguments about politics on the internet, there's not a lack of places you can go.
Right. And that's just, we only have so many moderators. We try to get as many as we can over time, but it's a slower process where I'm very careful with who we can trust with really steering conversations, because I've seen, again, I have to take that slowly because I've seen far too many, as you've seen too, Dan, forums and Discords turn into moderators crushing everyone. And I just can't let that happen either. So it's just about making it more manageable. And I just, want to put that out there, that this is a place you can come to listen to gaming hardware discussions without having to, worry about that type of thing. And at this, and also just, I need to say, as we get bigger too, there's going to have to be more and more things that we do to manage, the community. And so the purpose of the Patreon is to discuss the latest gaming hardware tech news and the latest content coming out of Moore's Law is Dead. And that's what it's for.
Yeah.
And we're going to err on the side of making it manageable so that there's as little overhead as possible so that we can afford to do this as a main job. Because remember, you guys are paying for not just me, but Dan's time, Gerard's time, and we don't have 1 million subscribers right now. So it's very easy for me to err on the side of manageability as well, which is also to say that I have to announce, there are a lot of, members that are, I guess you'd say, I've called them hitchhikers as a joke, but people who aren't subscribed to the Patreon anymore in the Discord. This is just a heads up that I unfortunately do need to say. If you want to be in the Discord, you're going to have to be at the proper tiers pretty soon. So this is just a final heads up as we go into 2021, that as we are no longer a Patreon of a few hundred people, but of almost 1,000 people, and assumably we will get above 1,000, you need to be at the right Patreon tier to be in the Discord soon. So that's just a heads up to those people. And hey, look, if you don't have the extra money, that's fine. All of the extra content that we put out there and bank every week will be there whenever you decide to rejoin us, So I don't know, just some business to get out in the beginning. Blokes writes in and says, Tom is big smelly. That is all.
That's a good point.
On the note of people rejoining certain Patreon tiers, Blokes is back, as you can see, Dan.
Well, that's good to see. And I'm glad the first thing he has to say is really important.
You know what, Blokes? As far as I'm aware, you've never been around me or Dan, so you don't know if we're smelly or not.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most important argument to make, is that you don't know, man. Which is to say that I think I'm not smelly, but I think the most defendable argument would be you don't know.
You don't know.
This is undisputable.
One could not dispute it, Tom.
All right, so let us get into story number 1, which I and this is something I'm getting tired of discussing, but I figured let's put it in one more time, since there was all this hullabaloo around the launch of our last Tom and Dan News Broken Silicon episode. I'm tired of talking about this. I think most people are tired of talking about this, but we did get reader mails about it. And so I figure, instead of focusing on any one story, let's just have some final discussions about availability, marked up prices, what people are thinking right now with what is probably the highest demand we've seen in high-end gaming. In my lifetime?
Yeah, probably.
It's starting to rival what happened when there was a mining boom, except it's mostly gamers.
Yeah.
And I want to be very clear about that. Yes, Nvidia is selling half of their cards to miners, but AMD isn't. And as far as I can tell, the majority of the cards being sold this quarter overall are going to gamers. And I mean, if you look at what's going on with the consoles as well, which cannot be used for mining, it's very, very hard to get those as well. So there's just no way around it. This holiday season is all about people wanting the highest end gaming products to a greater degree than I think I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, like we've said before, it turns out that if you put everyone inside for a year, even though there's a contraction for some people in the economy that are going to have financial issues, but overall, apparently it drives sales. I wouldn't have predicted that, but that's what happened.
Well, and the people that were forced inside, most of the people that were people who have jobs that they could do remotely anyways, and so they probably saved up money this year. And so if you think about, where sales are really being driven in the high end, this is coming from the people that saved up money all year. And I don't know, I'll just speak for myself. I think as we look at, as of this recording, the vaccine's coming to the United Kingdom. It's coming to the U.S. soon, and of course, Europe and the rest of the world. I think a lot of people are going, you know what, we're almost done. Let me just play games for a couple months while we, hopefully get to some sort of almost to the end of this horrific quarantine period.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we secure doses quickly.
The Boston Beast writes in then, and on this availability discussion, he asks, I have a queued order for an Asus TUF 6800 XT for $850. Should I cancel it and wait for prices to normalize, or is it worth it in the current market? I mean, I guess I could always resell it. And do you think AMD could enable resizable bar on a 5700 XT, 3800 XT combo? Well, let me answer that first. I think if AMD wanted to, yes, which he's talking about smart access memory.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I think they could if they wanted to. Clearly. And we'll get into that in a story later. But to more focus on your question, should you cancel an $850 order for the 6800 XT? Again, I think it comes down to when you'll be able to game and when you feel it's worth paying extra to game at a specific time of the year. This is the same thing I said at the beginning of the year. And I was like, yeah, I would eventually sell my 2080 Ti for $1,200 because I just think that it's not going to be worth that eventually. Which let me see how insane this is when we'll know prices are truly insane, as if it's back up to no. And so there's a lot of people asking, I shouldn't have sold my 2080 Ti. When I look at buy it now, it's still $900, and you were able to sell that for $1,100 a few months ago. So if you took my advice to sell the 2080 Ti, you can rebuy it now for less than you sold it for, guys. So that was definitely good advice. Having said that, though, I mean, the argument I made back then, though, is if you're not going to sell the 2080 Ti, maybe it's because you just want to game this summer and you have the extra money and you don't want to bother with shuffling cards around. And I get it. And so that's all I can say to Boston Beast is at the end of the day, if you want it as soon as possible and you're willing to pay for it, then sure. But it's hard for me to justify paying over $700 for, well, really, it's hard for me to justify paying over $500, if I'm being honest, for any graphics card. So $850 is just, I mean, at that point, I'd rather just spend the rest on the 6900 XT eventually, which obviously that's sold out. So of course, but I'm just saying, like, I wouldn't pay that much for the card. That's my honest opinion, man. I wouldn't pay that much for it. And so the fact that you don't even have it yet, I would have never placed the order. So I'm kind of the wrong person to ask.
I mean, I don't think it's worth $850. And I think I would also add, how long is it going to be on back order for? Like, how long are you going to be in the queue to get it as well?
Which this is something to discuss as well as people, I think, hilariously comparing the 6800 XT launch to the 3080 launch, the 3080 that launched 3 months ago to the 6800 XT that hasn't even been out a month. I'm getting a lot of people writing into me now that I'm starting to bring it up that they still don't have their 3080 pre-orders yet. Yet. It's been 3 months. So these launches are not comparable yet. Give it 3 months, then we can compare them, people. And so you just might have to accept that you're going to be waiting 3 months. And who knows what happens when they fill that order. Because as far as I know, AMD is steadily ramping Navi 21, and they are even shifting some of their wafers over to Big Navi because of how competitive it is with Nvidia this time. And with that in mind, I don't think you can rule out that just in February, prices drop and it's available. and that they might just fill your order like a couple weeks before that happens. And I don't know.
That would be the other thing I'd be worried about is if it becomes more easily available, like a month after you get it, prices might drop for these things by like $200.
Hey, Tom here, jumping in with a last-minute update to the podcast after recorded. The previous day, there was being discussed that AMD would eventually discontinue the reference designs, which, as of right now, are the ones that are usually around MSRP. And, well, a day later, Scott Herkelman has just confirmed they are not discontinuing it, at least for now. AMD will indefinitely continue the reference design. And I thought this was worth adding to the podcast because, again, look, the reference design is the one AMD really has full control over pricing on AIBs with. And so if they keep making this and selling it from their own website, which never has marked up prices compared to Newegg or eBay, then this will cause downward pricing pressure. Again, I think it's about 25% of the 6800 XT cards are the reference design as of now. So who knows if it will continue that ratio? Who knows if AMD will only start making 10% of them at that reference design with reference MSRP? But the fact that AMD will, at least as we know right now, keep making reference designs that are usually around MSRP will cause downward pressure on pricing in Q1. And so I just think that's worth remembering. If you have a pre-order for an $850 AIB card, if you want to keep it, you want it as soon as possible, and you have the money, you don't care, okay, that's fine. But just keep in mind that AMD's making the $650 version and has no intention to discontinue it as of now. So it might just show up for $200 less. And if $200 matters to you, it's worth thinking about. All right, back to the show.
Boy Ram writes in and says, "Hi there, Tom and Dan. Watching the hysteria, scalping, fanboy rage, and supply issues have reinforced my general attitude of never pre-ordering hardware and waiting at least a few months for the market to settle down." You know, I got to say that that's been true every year. And it just seems like there's more anger this year. When has this not been true? When has it ever been possible to buy these cards at launch?
I don't know if it's just because we're in it more because of the channel that we're noticing the anger more, but I feel like the anger is worse this year. And yeah, it's always hard to get graphics cards, whatever piece of tech you want when it comes out. It's never once been easy. You have to either wake up early to get the product, and it still might not even happen. Like, that's always how it's worked.
And then compound that with, you know, COVID-related shipping issues and demand for high-end gaming products. Again, this is like reported, you know, you guys can look this up. Demand's up 40% in addition to that. And it's like, I don't know, maybe that's why some of the anger's there. But I have to say everyone's just probably stressed out from this year. And so that's where it's coming from as well, to be honest.
Well, yeah, that's definitely part of it.
Yeah, and I guess the one thing I keep saying, though, in the Discord as well is the one group of people that I definitely do feel bad for is if their PC just broke and they can't get anything reasonably. That I do feel bad for.
Yeah, that does legitimately suck.
L8N8 writes in and says, "Hey, love the podcast. Just joined your Patreon today specifically to ask you this question." Well, thank you, Late Nate. Oh, L8N8. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it must be Late Nate. With all of us lamenting our inability to do anything about the PC game console scalpers, has anyone ever considered the role eBay and other online vendors play in all of this? Everyone is mad at Nvidia, but beyond having anti-bot software, which I assume can always be thwarted somehow, they can't really be responsible for who purchases their products. And to a certain extent, I agree. Aren't the real villains in all this websites like eBay who directly profit off of these predatory transactions? Those jackals taking a 10% cut off of every $1,400 5950X that gets sold? I've been thinking about this for a while, and I have an idea. One that only someone like Tom could... only someone like Tom could make happen. Well, back up. We'll see. I don't know about that. I think people think I have way more power than I actually have, which is to say I have no power. We as the tech community will petition all the online retailers who allow scalping on their websites to adopt new sales guidelines that prohibit vendors from selling new products above their MSRP for a certain period of time after release. We could even form a volunteer organization of tech geeks to the online legwork of reporting them, or even offer to volunteer on their end to verify, moderate reporting of scalping, thereby reducing the amount of resources they would have to allocate. I mean, I don't know, kind of stopping the reader mail there. What I would say is that I don't think you can do that. I don't even know if that would be legal for them to be able to ask eBay to do that. I mean, I guess they could ask.
Well, what I was going to say is I think for something like this to actually happen, some form of legislation would have to be made about selling products at MSRP. So essentially banning reselling is what I'm talking about, I guess. And I don't know, there's probably some constitutional argument in the US against that. eBay doesn't really have an incentive to not allow this type of transaction on their platform. It's not illegal. Mm-hmm. It's just annoying. Like I said this to Tom, like while we were talking one night, that there's just these middlemen that add no value to anything they're selling, that are just making money off of literally doing nothing. And it's incredibly frustrating, but I don't know what else to say.
It's not always eBay. Amazon, and especially Newegg during previous mining booms, has been incredibly guilty of artificially marking up prices during mining booms. And it's because they can, and people bought it.
Yeah, Newegg sells their stuff all the time at above MSRP. And as far as I know how Newegg works, they're not being like product resellers. It's just, they can mark it up because the demand is there.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, I still put most of the blame on AMD and Nvidia. They need to, when they sell products directly from their website, which they should try to sell as many as possible, both for their own profit margins, by the way, cutting out the middleman, and to just kind of set a base level so that there's always that there in the background. If like Newegg gets too greedy, they always have to be concerned. But if we mark this up too much, what happens if AMD gets more stock before us? Then we're sitting with all this inventory. I think it's up to Nvidia and AMD to come up with systems that are as bot-proof as possible, which is to say, I really think it's as simple as you should be able to pre-order a card directly through Nvidia and AMD's website. You provide your credit card information, shipping information, and you have to pay up front. And then you're given an estimation of when you'll get the card. And maybe even at a certain point, some other type of verification as well, so that there's also this kind of wiggle room between when you pre-order and when it's shipped, where they can kind of verify the order and go, yeah, this doesn't seem to all be coming from one person.
Yeah, because I'm not sure how all of these bot sellers are able to thwart like the steps they currently have, because as far as I know, like Newegg for product releases I think they would only allow shipping of one item to a specific address, even if it came from different accounts with different credit card numbers and like different billing addresses. So they're able to thwart this somehow.
Yeah. And so, but at the very least, if you do that, it reduces how many, I would assume, one entity can order from any one website.
Yeah.
And it does create a ton of busy work. After that, the best thing that will combat these scalpers is, and I've talked about this before, with these conglomerates that are buying up as many Xbox Series X's and PS5s as possible, thousands of them, and stockpiling them, that eventually what I can see happening to them sooner than you might think is, as Sony and Microsoft ramp up production more and more, out of nowhere, you can walk into a Best Buy every other week and find one of these consoles, and the scalpers are stuck holding tens of thousands of consoles they didn't sell at a marked up price, and they're just left with all this inventory. That's a part of the solution as well, is the scalpers getting bit in the ass at the end of this, which a lot of them will be.
We'll see, depending on how much stock they have left. Yeah, they could. This endeavor to buy up as many PS5s and Xbox Series X's and 3090s, whatever, will end up biting them in the ass, and I hope they lose money. But
and then they'll think about doing it again. But the thing is, this is just a year where everything's in demand, and they struck opportunistically in a quarter where it was the time to do this if you're a scalper.
Yeah, and it's frustrating because I keep saying, and me saying this isn't really going to change the situation, but it's very frustrating. If people just collectively didn't buy them, they would lower their prices. And I know it's pointless frustration about this because, there's always going to be some person that's going to buy it because of money or game theory. Someone's always going to buy it, and that's going to drive the increased price. Even though if we all just collectively agreed, no, we're not doing it.
But if less people did, it would make an impact.
Yeah, but you're right.
And you have to remember that at this level of stockpiling, if, for instance, they couldn't sell the scalp PS5s for more than 700, they'd be making way less profits. And eventually they'd probably decide the headache wasn't worth it.
Yeah, that's true.
Jory writes in and says, do you have any feelings on long-term solutions to scalpers? Just spitballing off the top of my head, online purchasing ID, a new plugin that detects your current PC hardware. I guess that would work. Yeah, I guess we already kind of a procedurally generated mini game that must be completed to purchase as an in-demand product. I suppose we kind of already answered this. I think we kind of just spilled into what Jury was asking as well. I think our thoughts are just a lot of this is there's a minimum amount of things they should be doing that they still aren't, and that there's only so much you can do, right?
Yeah, and I mean, some of the things he's talking about, I think might happen eventually, like purchasing something online might be connected to your like social security number in some way. I don't know. I don't really like that because those that purchase information leaks a lot. So I don't
like all the time.
I don't really want my social security number, frankly, connected to the security of Newegg.
Connor writes in and says, hi, Tom and Dan. Warning, Dan may not be included.
Oh,
okay, well, we'll see. Do you think Nvidia is playing hardball with AIB prices because it will force AIBs to recoup the cost on their AMD cards, thus creating a price parity and feeding off the narrative they are as bad as each other? I heard one interesting thing from one source, which was something about a requirement for like validating cooler designs on one date to try to mess with their development of something on AMD at the same time. I wasn't able to verify that though. Outside of that though, I mean, to directly answer your question, no, I don't think so. I think Nvidia is playing hardball with AIB prices to try to make as much profit as possible. And that's that. And that AIB didn't make as much profits this year from Nvidia as they wanted to, both because the margins on Ampere are thinner than usual, and because they didn't get to sell as many as I think Nvidia frankly led the AIBs on to believe, right?
Yeah.
That they kind of led them on to believe, oh, don't worry, more stock will be coming. And they just kept selling them to miners. I think they're just trying to make it up on the other end with AMD. And frankly, again, I think there's a point not enough people are making, which is, oh, AIBs this, oh, availability that. I know the 3060 Ti was provided in very large numbers and it sold out at 500 guys. So it's us.
Yeah.
It's people buying it that's doing most of this at this point.
I mean, yeah, of course it is. Like, availability is starting to get better, but for newer products, but that doesn't mean that it's any easier to get them, because right now it seems like people just pay whatever price they need to get it. Or a number of people will.
And eventually, I think sooner than people might expect, prices could just collapse when supply meets demand, and the people willing to spend 30% extra, there wasn't as many as they thought. But at the same time, that's how supply and demand works, just buy it or don't. If you can wait, then wait. It's really up to you,
Yeah. I'm
not going to be one of those people that, well, it doesn't really matter because we're about to get into it. A lot of the tech tubers, well, yeah, let's just get into it. Aiden FS writes in and says, at least the 6900 XT is a better card than the 5700 XT 50th anniversary edition, which was $50 more for gold trim and a card with a tiny overclock. It's like 2% better or something hilarious. So that is the opening reader mail for story number 2. 6900 XT reviews are out. AMD competes at the top of the phony GPU war of 2020, which is what I titled my own video. I'm also going to quote here from TechSpot. The Radeon RX 6900 XT was never going to make sense, not unlike the GeForce RTX 3090, even though NVIDIA's card does get you a lot more VRAM. Essentially, the 6900 XT is in the same boat as the 6800 XT, with a few extra cores enabled for 5 to 10% more performance. For the 6900 XT to make sense from a value perspective, it shouldn't exceed the $750 price point, relatively speaking, assuming you could, of course, buy a 6800 XT for $650, which you can. But we're hoping for that to come back down in early 2021. In a world where GPU availability wasn't an issue, there's literally zero reason to buy the 6900 XT. The same is also true for the RTX 3090 over the 3080, unless you required the extra VRAM for some reason. Short of that, there's no reason to spend much more money for basically the same product, which is funny because I put together my 6900 XT analysis video before reading the ending of the tech spot, the written up version of his video. I didn't realize he also literally mentioned 750 as a more interesting price point for this graphics card. Although I guess it's worth pointing out, is it a more interesting price point when you have people pre-ordering 6800 XTs for 850? You could argue it's the same relative difference anyways.
I mean, the price was on the 6900 XT, whether it says 750 on their website or not, or 1,000 on their website, it was probably going to get to 1,000 on functionally. And if you go to eBay and buy it from resellers, I'm sure they're selling it for like
I think it's already at like 1,200 or something stupid.
And tomorrow it's going to be at 1,400.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, which I guess isn't as bad as a $1,400 PS5.
No, it's not as bad.
Relatively speaking. But yeah, so I guess just to summarize my thoughts on the 6900 XT, I guess, as expected, it beat the 3090 in rasterization in 1440p, guys. I mean, how much less money do you want to say it is? 500, 1,000? It depends what you can get a 3090 for.
Yeah.
It did lose in 4K, though, slightly. But I think it was interesting. It wins in 1440p by less than it loses in 4K, just kind of showing that I really, and I highlight this in my video, think they should have put faster memory on there. And it kind of led me to the conclusion that, look, guys, and it's funny how many people in the comments are like mad that I'm being critical of AMD for some reason. I think the 6900 XT is the overall more impressive card than the 3090. I literally say that in my video, and that gives you my opinion on the card. But at the same time, I think it could have been even better. I think either they should have pushed it, even if it would require a delay, with faster memory, liquid cooling, and higher clocks, or they should have just sold it for a little bit less, even if availability was less, because either way, again, it makes the 3090 look stupid. Point taken, AMD. You mashed NVIDIA's top card, kind of, and you did it for less money. NVIDIA's just charging more for no reason now, because they don't really have the performance crown by much.
Yeah.
Point taken, AMD. Having said that, I think you could have made a bigger splash if you sold it for like 800 or less, or if you decided to really give it faster memory and win in rasterization for 1,000. And I know it's just a symbolic thing either way. All these cards are within 10% of each other, so what does it matter? But I think symbolically beating it in rasterization would have been worth delaying the card, and that's just a point I made in my video. I don't know. What did you think looking at all these reviews?
And what I would add to that is if they beat it in rasterization performance, it would have been a little bit like just out and outright beat it in rasterization performance. It would have been like narratively a more interesting discussion, because it's like it pretty much matches at the 3090 rasterize. It's a lot worse than the 3090 when it comes to ray tracing, but I don't know. You spent $1,500 to play 30 frames per second in 1440p. Cool. So I think the other piece to add is that it's not nearly as good at ray tracing. So if they would have won in one of those, it would have been a more interesting discussion, because it's like still technically a weaker card for $500 less dollars, and it's barely weaker, but still a little weaker.
Right. And it's funny how whenever I put out these videos, I can't help but get attacked by either AMD or NVIDIA fanboys. Because when I look at the comments of my video right now, most people, again, overwhelmingly upvoted, like 95, 96% upvoted, whatever. But there's a decent amount of people, at least when the video first came out, saying, what do you mean? It's not that impressive. It's $500 less than the 3090 for roughly the same performance. And I go, well, I do think it's overall more impressive, but like you just said, Dan, it would be more interesting. It's a missed opportunity. AMD made a product that isn't bad, but it could have been great.
Yeah.
That's my point. I think it's good. I just think it could have been great. And I think that's a point more people need to make, is that AMD really could have taken more mind share if they would have played it a little differently.
And I think they still are going to take a lot, because like they put AMD and Nvidia put out almost the same card, and AMD is selling it for $500 less.
Yeah, and I guess when I'm trying to think of like other things about this graphics card, I think a lot of people here are saying, well, it's the same performance. It's like, it loses in ray tracing by a lot. And did you see this, Dan? Today, Minecraft RTX came out of beta.
Oh, no, I didn't see that.
What a surprise that they decided this day to make Minecraft RTX to come out of beta. But the point is, it does perform far, far less than the 3090 in ray tracing games right now. I'm not convinced that will be true forever. I've said this multiple times, but right now that's the case. And right now, I can't imagine someone willing to spend over $1,000 on a graphics card who doesn't just want the best. And technically, there are a couple weaknesses in this card.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was looking at it, especially once you start getting to like high or ultra settings for ray tracing. The 6900 XT loses by like 50%. Well, is like 2/3 the frame rate when like ray tracing is high or ultra usually. That's a pretty big performance difference. Now, once again, we're talking about like 30 frames per second versus 20 frames per second. So neither of them are good. And that's just because ray tracing is a pretty new feature that I think is still kind of a gimmick.
Which I think is also, to be fair, worth pointing out. I say the 3090 is technically the stronger card. It wins in 4K by 5%. And if you turn on ray tracing, it wins by a lot more. That makes it, quote unquote, stronger. Mm-hmm. But you also have to acknowledge, and I point this out in my video, I looked at Fortnite ray tracing performance that was analyzed on Hardware Unboxed, and it was like in 1440p with low levels of ray tracing with DLSS turned on, the 3090 got just above 60 FPS and its minimums were below 60. So this is a $2,000 card with low ray tracing and DLSS turned on, which has artifacts, getting minimums not above 60. So I think even though it's the stronger card, you have to point out that is anyone actually going to turn on ray tracing in most of these games when the performance is that bad? It's twice what AMD is, but it's still not very good or acceptable. It's an esports game. Well, it can't even hold 60 minimums in 1440p with a $2,000 card. It's a waste of your time to turn on ray tracing.
I mean, yeah, I probably wouldn't turn it on. And based on that information alone is a big reason why I'm going to skip this generation, because this new feature that's being touted isn't very good yet.
Yeah. So let's get to, we got quite a few reader mails here about the cards. Voodoo61238 writes in and says, the 6900 XT is an impressive product that's great for the industry and consumers overall, I think. Can you get it? Not right now. Is it good value? No. The topmost product tier never is. Is it good at ray tracing? No, but that's expected. It's a lot of no's, though, for saying, see, this is why I say it's good, but not great. But he goes on, to me, the most interesting thing was benchmarks where these AMD optimized games had the 6900 XT handily in the lead. I wonder what this might indicate for AMD-based consoles impacting GPU performance over the next couple of years. Well, I would say two things. Number one, don't always just say it's the console optimizations. The 6900 XT has 128 ROPs, Infinity Cache. It's a strong architecture in its own right. I don't think it's just because of the console optimizations.
Yeah.
But also, yeah, I think I pointed this out in my 6800 XT review day video. I don't know. When you look at the newest games, AMD's doing really well, and I resent some reviewers that go in these titles that favor AMD more than on average. But then you look at the average, and it seems like the ones favoring AMD are all games in the past 8 months. That's an indication that AMD may actually be stronger than you'd think overall next year. And so and we're almost to next year. I do think that's worth pointing out. Again, I don't know. A lot of the latest games, the 6900 XT crushes the 3090, and it would not surprise me if its ray tracing performance caught up quite a bit once developers got more patches out next year.
I mean, yeah, and that's just a thing that we won't know until we're probably a year out. Well, yeah, I would say like a year out from right now, or 6 months, is the 6900 XT, quote unquote, catching up in performance. I mean, that's happened before, that certain architectures aged way better than others. And it's interesting to see that it might happen again with another product line where NVIDIA's products are kneecapped by having too little RAM.
Oh, yeah. So there's that as well. Polinsky writes in and says, supposedly bin chips for the 6900 XT will have a 100 watt higher PSU suggestion, 850 versus 750, with only 100 megahertz higher boost, though, based on Linus Tech Tips benchmarks. Do you think AMD is holding back on the stock boost range to allow overclockers to crank the numbers, which is the card for better overclocking results when comparing to the 3090? Or do you think they were more focused on having more tame power usage as the reception from the new 3000 series looked bad on this front? I just think that they put it at the clock speeds that they think overall would be the best balance, and that if they would have put faster memory, they probably would have erred more towards clocking it faster. But guys, you don't. There's no point in adding 30% more rasterization performance when it has the same bandwidth as a 6800 XT, especially when, again, think about it. They always planned on probably the 6800 XT being the top card. There's a last minute decision to not do that, so it's not as well balanced. And I think they said, we could add more performance, but not without the extra memory. So we might as well at least make it the most efficient card on the market that's in this performance range.
Once again, that makes them look like the winner over Nvidia in this regard, even if it's a slightly weaker product overall.
Which again, I never thought there was going to be a lot of availability of the 6900 XT, certainly not at launch. I was actually thinking, I wouldn't be surprised if it literally was a paper launch for this one. It was always there symbolically to show, hey, look, we're right next to NVIDIA's top card, and no one said we would be. And I highlight that in the video too. Like, look at the 5700 XT launch. Above it was the 2070 Super, the 1080 Ti, the 2080, and the 2080 Ti. Like, there's no longer you have a situation where AMD is just looking up at like a pack of NVIDIA cards, both previous gen and current gen. Now you have, it's like, no, it's up there. NVIDIA can't really claim they have any huge performance win.
I mean, no, they don't anymore.
Yeah. Deco writes in and says, one thing we haven't seen all too significantly are overclocking these results yet for the 6900 XT. In terms of performance, surely people are too preemptively judging the cards when it should beat the 3090 once manual overclocks have been tested in the coming days. I think overclock to overclock, it will be enough to make the 6900 XT overall equal in rasterization, if not slightly stronger. I mean, I would agree. Trogaholic writes in fact, and he says, when we see a Sapphire Toxic model, how much more performance will it be able to eke out with the poor gains we get from overclocking and the hard limits on core and memory? Well, they won't have those on their AIB model, right? I mean, EVGA just released a BIOS for one of their 3080s that gave it a 480 watt TDP, which is
nice.
Okay. So with that in mind, I kind of actually doubt Sapphire would do that. That's insane. But what I think the important thing to say is when I answer this question about a potential Sapphire Toxic 6900 XT is the difference between possible and what they'll do. I can't promise you what they'll do.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure. But I know there's 18 gigabit per second memory out there that would give you 12.5% more bandwidth. And I know in labs, I've heard that they have 19 gigabit per second. I would doubt they would use that though, but I know that exists. So at the end of the day, though, they can at least give it a 10% bandwidth boost. And I bet at stock settings with the proper cooling, they could make this thing instead of running it. I think Hardware Unboxed found it was generally running at 2.2 to 2.3 gigahertz most of the time. I bet they can make it run at 2.5 gigahertz generally. So with a 10%, I think they could easily add 10%. I think they can add 10% performance. Whether they will or not, we'll have to find out. They really went all out. I mean, again, remember the 7970 Toxic added like 30-40% bandwidth or something absolutely absurd. Like it was like 1600 megahertz memory instead of 1375. So yeah, they added like 25% more bandwidth, and they had 1200 megahertz stock clocks in its boost mode, which compared to the gigahertz edition even was, like a 20% boost almost. So if they really wanted to, I bet they could clock this at 2.6 gigahertz, give it 19 gigabit per second memory. But I would guess they would probably go with 18 gigabit and 2.5 gigahertz.
It would be fun to see them do another like 7970
just
style
Out.
Toxic. Yeah, it's always fun when you see like Sapphire especially likes doing it, just releasing like a stupidly overclocked thing because like, well, this is the Toxic edition. This is where we're just unmitigated performance increase. That's all we care about.
Yeah, which I think, and I interviewed someone from Sapphire last year. We talk about this, how they don't want to put out a Toxic unless it deserves it. Like, what's the point in putting out for example, an RX 480 toxic, when what is it at best going to do? Be almost a 1070 while using more energy and probably costing the same as a 1070? Like, is there really a point in releasing that? And I would guess they will see a point in releasing this, especially like, when you think about it, they could, I think AMD would have to approve it though. Like if they put like 32 gigabytes on it, they could charge $2,000 if it beat the 3090 by 5-10% with more memory. There's a market for people to buy that now.
And yeah, they could advertise it as the strongest card on the market. So
Raul writes in, and well, it's really Raul writes in and says, do you think the 3080 Ti 20 gigabyte will bring down the cost of the 6900 XT, considering it's expected to cost $1,000 with 4 more gigs of RAM? I don't know. I mean, it would probably be the same. Again, right? When you look at a 3080 Ti, what's the performance? Well, the 3090 is 10% stronger than the 3080. So somewhere around a 3080 and somewhere around a 3090. I think it would basically tie the 6900 XT. I don't think it would bring down the price at all right away, depending on when it launches, which I believe it was stated to launch late January is what I last reported. But long term, I could see the 6900 XT coming down if AMD actually decided to supply a lot of them. I just don't know that they plan to.
Yeah, and that's another interesting thing. The 3080 Ti being $1,000. Something I don't know if they would launch it for $1,200, but I feel like they could, at least in the current market.
I mean, they could. The rumor I heard was $1,000, but who knows what they'll decide to do.
Yeah.
But I think, don't you agree? Like, it all just comes down to if AMD ever plans to have the 6900 XT have any decent volume, which everything I've heard is no. If they do, though, sure, maybe it will come down in price a bit. But I don't think they see I'd be skeptical they care. Yeah,
I mean, where they're going to sell most of their stuff is like the 6800 and 6700 XT.
And they would prefer to.
Yeah.
They want to sell the 80 compute unit cards for $2,000 to $3,000 to the professional market.
Yeah.
Dystopia writes in and says, do you think AMD will lower the price of the 6900 XT in the few months? Oh, so same question, basically. I don't know. Not in the next couple months. They would have to be getting incredibly good yields and have extra of the best yields to not send a data center to decide to just keep supplying it to gamers. I don't think it would officially go below 1,000. I think you would just see more inventory on Newegg and the AIB models drift lower. I don't think they would officially cut any prices.
Does AMD officially cut prices too usually, or do they just do the...
I mean, they have in the past, but lately it hasn't been happening a lot with either of these companies.
I mean, things are just holding their value way, way better than they usually do, so there's no reason to.
Yeah. Shifty McHacks writes in and says, with AMD and Nvidia now trading blows at the high end, do you foresee competition ramping up? In other words, quicker release cycles with bigger improvements, or do you think AMD and Nvidia will maintain the status quo and stick to incremental upgrades like every 2 years? I mean, yeah, like what Turing, which we all thought would be more temporary, really lasted for a full 2 years, the 2 years of Turing, and I don't know. I think that, yes, there will be more competition. I mean, I think you already saw that with even just the RX 5000 series, with NVIDIA launching 1 million versions of all of their cards in response. And I think you're going to see that happen more and more. Whether they do a full re-release or not, I don't know. I continue to believe the best move from NVIDIA, depending on how things pan out in the first half of next year, would be to just kind of release a refined Ampere launch as the RTX 4000 series, even if it's only 20% better overall at most. I think they should do that next year, because why not? Because I think there's room for it.
Yeah, I mean, and I agree. I think competition will ramp up. I think as opposed to what we've had for a while, which is like 1.5 to 2 years, it might condense down to like a year. Like you say, maybe even like with NVIDIA, like a 9-month cycle one time. But yeah, I think releases are probably going to get more frequent for a few years.
Yeah, and I think even if you look at, like, for instance, there is a 2080 Ti Super. It exists. They use it, I believe, in their GeForce Now is what it's called, servers, and they're 12 gigabytes, 2080 Ti's. They exist, and they were like 10, 15% stronger than the 2080 Ti. And in fact, what I always heard is, oh no, they're there. They use them in their servers, and they were just prepared to start selling them on Newegg if AMD ever launched big RDNA 1. They just never did, so they never cared. But now that AMD's competing in the high end, yeah, you can bet NVIDIA's never going to like AMD being better positioned. They're always going to be trying out new products to try to keep the momentum on their side.
Yeah.
Third Gamer writes in and says, I think that AMD made the 6900 XT to get rich 8th graders to make their parents buy it.
Good point.
I don't think so. I think some of the console scalping is the rich 8th graders. I think when it comes to these graphics cards, we just need to accept that a majority of gamers are over the age of 30 and have the money to buy them.
Yeah, I mean, most DIY people I know are people I've noticed at least start getting into it usually when they're in like high school. The people that get into it when they're younger are people that had parents that are DIYers, so they kind of just inherited that from them.
Well, speaking of do-it-yourself cards, let's talk about another one, Dan. Best transition in history. Story number 3. RTX 3060 Ti launches an overclocked 2080 Super for $500. I have 400 crossed out and I put 500 there. Of course, I've already done a video on this, and this was last week, but, it's worth covering in the news. And so I'll quote here, no matter which way you slice it, though, right now, the 3060 Ti is the best value $400 card on the market. There's simply no way you'd invest in a 5700 XT anymore. Then again, if availability is anything like what we've seen from the 3070, 3080, and 3090, buying a 3060 Ti is going to be extremely difficult at launch. Based on what we're hearing, availability will be similar to that of the 3070. Yeah, actually, it was more. There will be some 3060 Ti stock available, but it'll sell out right away and will be hard to get for the next few weeks. Another relevant point to this conversation, of the 4 3060 Ti graphics cards we have on hand, none of them will be available at the $400 MSRP, which is different than the 3080. At least then they had 10% of the stock at a token MSRP price. The EVGA 3060 Ti for the Win 3 Ultra, man, that name's not long enough, is expected to cost $450, while the MSI RTX 3060 Ti Gaming X Trio. Dan, why is there an X in the name?
I think what happens is they keep making more and more new models with like different brands.
Evolutions of the previous brand or something?
Yeah, so I think the brands keep morphing so they get more and more ridiculous as time goes on. That's my assumption, at least.
And I'm derailing my own reading of the TechSpot review, but I'm sorry, when I look at this, it's like Gaming X Trio. Just call it the Gaming X. Or the Trio.
I don't know, man.
What's happening?
I don't know.
It would be like it was like Xbox Series X Trio. You already have qualifiers.
Well, we need more qualifiers for no reason, Tom. That's why.
Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. No. Call of Duty Cold War.
Yeah.
Everyone's going insane. Let me continue this. I do need to finish this at some point. The Trio will sell for $470, and we expect we'll see a similar price from Gigabyte's 3060 Ti Gaming Overclock Pro. It's always 3. Asus didn't get us proper pricing in time for this review, but rest assured that the ROG Strix will cost at least $500, which, yeah, there was one model I saw that was almost $590 before they changed it last minute, at which point you might as well start looking at buying a 3070. See, I already covered the 3060 Ti. I mean, now you've had time to digest it. What are your thoughts on the 3060 Ti, Dan?
They released a card about 20% stronger than a 5700 XT a year later for the same price, and it's de facto $500. So if you can get it for $400 year over year increase for a price point, yeah, it's fine.
It's better and it has newer features, So yeah, I think at $400, the 3060 Ti, it's fine. Not great though, because really it's a year and a half later, 20% more performance. That's like the bare minimum. I wouldn't say that's great value.
No, it's not.
I would it's only great value compared to the 2080, which used to cost twice as much, but the 2080 was always dubious value. It's just like the 6900 XT isn't great value. It's just way better than the even worse 3090. So, but at 400 or below, which I hear they may actually get it down there because they do want to put pressure on Navi 22. I think it's fine. But above 400, especially above 430, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm with you.
At $500, it's not better price performance than the 5700 XT.
No, it's not. And that's the price of the fucking 3070.
Well, no, the 3070 is now almost 600.
Or if you want to buy it now, probably 900. But yeah.
Which overseas it often is. Yeah.
That sucks.
Yeah, so it is what it is. I mean, again, it's like, and you can kind of see it in the reviews from like Gamers Nexus and Hardware Unboxed, where they're just like not excited because it's like, what are we even advising? You know, here's the performance, here's the price, good at this, bad at this. Good luck.
Yeah, and I know this isn't a completely new story, but it's hard to be super excited about a mid-range card being $400. I don't know.
Which is what I talked about in my 3060 Ti video too, which is like, I just have to accept the mid-range is now 400, even though I always thought of it as like 350 or lower. But I'm going to tell you what, if all these mid-range cards start launching for 500 or more, which they kind of were with Turing, guys. I mean, the 2070 was TU 106, and they were selling that for 600 at launch. I'm just not in. I'm not advising it. It's not worth it, you know, and it's not in my best interest to say that. My best interest is to hype everything up so you watch more videos. But I have to be honest, you know, I'm not going to be recommending mid-range cards that are over 500. It's an 8 gigabyte card, guys. Those used to be 200.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, come on.
So it's because 500 in a semi-reasonable world, 500 is like the beginning of the high end. Or maybe, the beginning, or maybe even the middle of the
lower high end, usually, yeah.
But that's not what we're looking at anymore, so I don't know.
Cajun Canuck writes in and says, with the initial prices of Ampere and RDNA 2 AIB cards combined with extraordinary demand, do you expect these prices to move much before next summer? Tentatively, I say yes, actually. I do.
Yeah, 6 months. I think there will be a time for things to be less crazy.
Especially if AMD's aggressive with Navi 22, which Crispy Bacon writes in and says, would you bet $1,000 that the 6700 XT will be AMD's sub $500 2080 Ti? I would not, because it will not be as strong as the 2080 Ti based on story number 4. So story number 4, I just titled, Everyone Leaks Navi 22, Navi 23, and even Navi 24. So yeah, it's hard to even know where to begin here. I did my own 6700 XT leak. I know that others were leaking it, like Patrick Schur and Igor. So let me just summarize what's come out. To be clear, Navi 22 and Navi 23 have had little leaks here and there for the past year, including from Moore's Law is Dead. However, in the past week, the floodgates have truly opened from Twitter leakers, Igor and yours truly, Moore's Law is Dead. In summary, Navi 22 6700 XT seems poised to perform 8 to 16% better than the 5700 XT, while offering 50% more VRAM, less power usage, and most likely a lower price than the MSRP of the 5700 XT. It isn't so much a 3060 Ti killer, so much as a card to bring console-level performance to below $400. And then you saw my bill of materials info below, which I shared with you, but it's confidential. I can't share it publicly. If it's not below $350 or $330, I think this card is in trouble because I do believe the 3060 Ti will try to get to $400 or lower. Having said that, there's no reason it shouldn't be. AMD will be making what I've called the Lisa Su tax, which she's publicly stated they want 45% margins on all products moving forward. Even at around a 45% profit margin, they could sell this for $350 or $330. So it's not just optimism. It should be that price. And if it isn't, I will probably be hard on AMD. Most likely, the cut down 6700 non-XT will be positioned firmly below 300 based on what I've been told, likely with just 6 gigabytes against the GA106 RTX 3060. Performance should be a hair less than the 5700 XT, or roughly around the same. Although do note that there are 10 gigabyte models circulating, both in the professional lineup and being mentioned for mobility laptops. Patrick Schur on Twitter seems to confirm a mobile variant that has 10 gigabytes in addition to 6 gigabytes. So yeah, I'd say whatever it is, what I'm hearing is the 3060 Ti was about 10% stronger than AMD expected. For whatever reason, it's actually, I think, more than what we should have expected. But at the same time, Navi 22 is about 5% weaker than I expected. And so, yeah, they're kind of gearing up the 6700 XT to have enough VRAM, be competitively priced against the 3060 Ti, and then kind of make the 6700 more of a budget option. And then moving on, Navi 23 is also leaked again with 32 compute units and a 128-bit bus, likely without any Infinity cache, which I guess let me also say that I already confirmed in loose ends, 96 megabytes of Infinity cache in the 6700 XT. And the Navi 23 is positioned for 1080p gaming. It has half the bandwidth and no Infinity cache compared to the 5700 XT, but with RDNA 2's enhancements over RDNA 1, I actually could see this performing similar to a 5700 in 1080p. Well, certainly not at higher resolution. So I think that would be good if it was positioned, closer to 250 or 200. And then, of course, Navi 24, 128-bit, 24 CU, likely the replacement of the 5500 XT in the sub $200 market. Okay, there you go, Dan. What are your thoughts on all of this?
It's kind of hard to say thoughts on all of this because it's just a lot of
Let's go step by step. Navi 22.
Navi 22, if it's like 300 to 330 or something like that, that would be interesting to see. Pretty much 5700 XT performance, like you said, 100.
Well, stronger. Probably more like 2080 performance, 2080 super performance, but also with 12 gigabytes of RAM. The way you might put it is not 2080 Ti performance, but Titan Pascal performance for around $300. And so it would be about a 2080, but have enough VRAM for higher resolutions if you want to play at 60 hertz, which I think is just worth pointing out. That's like the same performance as my Radeon 7 and more than 8 gigabytes of RAM. So I've been very outspoken. Given the right settings, I can play any game at almost any resolution with the Radeon 7, despite people freaking out for $800 cards. Just turn down a few settings to high or medium, and I'm gaming in 4K, often around 100 hertz. Bringing that level of performance to the $300 market, I think, is more interesting than bringing 2080 Ti performance to the $500 market, because most people don't want to spend $500.
That would be good to see. It's a pretty decent year-over-year increase of performance for that price point, or technically lower price point. And I also think it's just kind of interesting the like gulf in performance potentially between like the 6800 XT. 6800 and the 6700 XT being actually, in my opinion, like somewhat reasonable. Like these, it's nice to see these product stacks not being completely compressed to the high end like they seem to have.
Well, but yet so far away from each other.
Yeah, it's interesting to see them go for that. Like not go for
targeting
the
two markets.
Yeah, it's interesting for them that they're pretty much not targeting that top mid-range price point this time around.
That's becoming so inflated, and I think it's worth. I think there's a couple things to highlight here. That look, at the end of the day, I don't know. I think $500 is already a lot to spend on a graphics card, so hopefully they can at least keep the around $300 market satiated. I mean, it's been actually an underserved market for the past couple of years. What, the 5700 XT was $400, and then the 5500 XT was just an RX 590 with less power usage. Like, pretty boring card for the same price as an RX 590, or maybe slightly less money. I think there's a lot of people with RX 580s or RX 480s that are still sitting there, or 1070s that might go, ooh, this is 50% stronger than my card for, $300. I'm in.
Yeah, those people, that market really hasn't been served for a while, I guess.
The other thing to address about Navi 22 is, to be honest, if you go back and look at my big Navi leak, which touched on early info I had on Navi 22 as well, this really isn't that different than the performance I said. I said above 2080 Super, and it could be at certain resolutions. So it's like 5%. I mean, remember, the 2080 Super is like 5% more than the 2080. So it's really actually pretty close to what I expected, maybe a little lower, but it shouldn't really surprise anyone. Like, if you look at the 6800 and the 6700 XT, assuming this info is correct, which I think it is completely verified by now, to be honest, like, a lot of people are going, this doesn't make any sense. Navi 22 has 20% more IPC than RDNA 1 and 20% higher clock speeds and infinity cache. It has to be 30%, 40% better than the 5700 XT. And so to that, I would say, so you're saying it's somehow only 10% weaker than, or 20% weaker than the 6800, despite the 6800 having 50% more compute units? I don't think having a slightly higher clock speed than the 6800 makes up for that.
Yeah.
No one should have ever expected this to be a 2080 Ti.
I don't know where that assumption comes from, aside from maybe that's a product some people want that they're just not going to get. I don't know, because yeah, it is pretty big. Like, I'm looking at the graphics, at graphs right now for performance. It's like, yeah, that is like a 40% performance difference between the start of their high end and the end of their mid range is like a 40% in the 18 game average and like 1440p. That's pretty huge. And I don't know, maybe that they just don't see that much of a market in that no man's land that I guess the 60.
Well, that's what I would highlight too, is this is intentional. A lot of people would say, well then what are they going to do? And I would say, I don't know that, like, I don't think they're going to cut down the 6800 more. Could be wrong, but that thing's already cut down a ton from 80 to 60. Look at the Radeon 7. That was 4 compute units cut down. Look at, like, this is very, very cut down already. I think the 6800 is the model where they just make sure they can use almost all of their yields, even if they have defects. I don't think they need a lower tier than that. Again, we'll see, but and so when you look at 2 dies, then and one's an 80 CU1 and then one's a 40, well, they intended this. They must have said, you know what, we can compete in the high end, and also the high end card will be used in data center. And then also we need to continue to serve the RX 480 market that we neglected last gen. And I just think that's what they're trying to do.
Well, and I'm trying to remember, because I feel like we've said this before, like when we didn't know what RDNA 2 was, aside from outside of leaks, what we had heard a couple months back is that Navi 21 is 80 something compute units and 22 is 40, right? And it seemed
there were rumors it was 60 as well,
okay.
But that's so far. I think people were mixing up 6800 models being samples.
Yeah, so I mean, if there isn't like a 60 CU die, yeah, I think the 80 and 84, right, and 40 CU Golf. And,
no, 80.
80 CU and 40 CU Golf and dies. Yeah, that probably is intentional.
They intend to target these two markets. And I guess the last thing I would say about this is a lot of people go, how can this performance only be this much better? It's like, well, guys, again, like, as I highlighted in my 6700 XT leak, take the 6900 XT and assume the 40 CU model is 60% as strong as the 80 CU model. That still puts it a little below the 2080 Super, guys. So it was always optimistic to think it would be above the 2080 Super by a huge margin. And I always thought it would just be right about there. Now it sounds like it might be a few percent below that, although I'm not entirely sure. It can fluctuate plus or minus 5%. But, that's the point. It's going to be clocked like 20% faster, but it has a 192-bit bus. But it has infinity cache to make up for that. That's why it's probably 10%-ish or 15 or so more than the 5700 XT. It's all going to come down to price on this one, which is how it always works in the mid-range. Outside of that, I don't know. Do you have anything to add about Navi 23 or Navi 24?
Not too much, no. I mean, it's the value cards that, I don't know, I'm sure they'll all max out 1080p just fine.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people said Navi 23, how can that have 32 compute units when Navi 22 has 40? And I would just go, well, compute units take up very little space. So if you're going to make a card weaker, you might as well save die space by cutting the bus in half and then just removing a few compute units, and then you're done. Because you might as well make it have as many compute units as possible, so it at least dominates 1080p performance, because that's what these cards are predominantly still used for. Same with Navi 24.
Yeah, and infinity cache, like that, doesn't that take up a lot of die space too?
It does.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you're going to nerf performance between 22 and 23, you might as well just remove the whatever it is, right? 50 millimeter squared of infinity cache, a few compute units, and give it less RAM.
Yeah.
Okay. Dead of Night writes in and says, is it possible AMD will come out with a killer monolithic APU for all gamers, for those who don't really need more than 8 cores, competing directly with Rocket Lake? I mean, I wouldn't rule that out. I mean, I think Cezanne is something they are just going to bring to the do-it-yourself market. And again, the reason I don't believe they brought Renoir was for two reasons. They already had the 12 nanometer, R5 3000 series APUs. So they already had APUs in the 3000 series. And then at the same time, Renoir only has 8 PCIe lanes. So there's kind of this awkward platform support with those processors as well compared to the 3600 and up. So I think that they were just waiting for Cezanne or another APU, the dozens of other APUs I've heard about that are being tested that will have enough PCIe lanes, 4.0 support, and that's when they'll just roll it out into the 5000 series. And if you look at Cezanne, I think that's going to perform pretty decently. And I think over time, you'll hear this in upcoming Broken Silicons with some guests, like, I just think the sub $150 market is a hard one to service anymore when wafer costs are above 10,000. Like 7 nanometer wafer costs were double 16 nanometer, and 5 nanometer is going to be like 50% more or something, or maybe even more than that than 7. And so, in the high end, that doesn't matter. Who cares? What, $150 for the die instead of $100 for the die? People are spending $800, doesn't make a difference. Give me more performance. But once you get to the low end, it does matter. And with GDR6 just costing like $7 a gigabyte or something,
yeah, manufacturing.
There's only so cheap you can make it.
Yeah, manufacturing is kind of pricing this tier out of existence, essentially.
Yeah, and so that will be serviced by APUs, I think by Zen 4 for sure.
Oh yeah, probably.
Desktop CPUs are a lot like my dog. They run best in the cold. And that goes for all desktop CPUs, whether it's Zen 3, Comet Lake, or Rocket Lake. So if you get one of those shiny new processors, why not get something that cools it to its best ability? And I gotta say, the Freezer 50 is definitely hefty enough to be up for the task. Arctic's Freezer 50 is a dual tower design that works on both AMD and Intel systems with fully addressable RGB and maximum performance for a lower price than the competition. Just make sure you have enough room to fit this beast in your system, but as for myself, I can't wait to use it once I can afford a big boy benchmarking station. Go to Arctic's website for more information or use the links below to find out how to buy. Well, it's the holiday season, and you know what that means. Lots of travel. For this holiday season, and hopefully for a more open 2021, I bought a studio laptop for mobile editing. And of course, well, it didn't come with an open license of Microsoft Office, and those can be very expensive, especially for the professional version. But luckily, I was able to get Microsoft Office Professional for a reasonable price from cdkoffers.com. Go to cdkoffers.com and use the promotional code BrokenSilicon to get 25% off an already cheap list price of Windows 10 Professional. Then all you do is click on your email account, go to User Center, and then My Purchase Orders to get the code. Just use this code with a normal download of Windows 10 Professional from Microsoft's website. All right, links in the description.
So moving on to story number 5, AMD Radeon 6800 XT Smart Access Memory enabled on Intel Z490 motherboards, quoting from video cards. Recently, a new BIOS from Asus for their Z490 motherboard has enabled this option. Simply by enabling the feature in the BIOS, Radeon RX 6000 series GPUs should automatically take advantage of the Smart Access Memory feature. With Japanese website ASCII decided to give this BIOS a test. AMD never said that this feature would be exclusive to RX 6000 GPUs and RX 5000 processors. However, these product lines are listed as supported on the technology page simply because that's what AMD's tested so far. Another reason, obviously, is marketing and sales of their next-gen hardware. So just kind of skipping down this, the charts are kind of pretty badly labeled and confusing, to be honest. But parsing through them, the synopsis is this. They get up to 10% gains in minimums with the 6800 XT on a Z490 Intel motherboard. It works. And it's interesting, Linus touches on this in the 6900 XT review as well, that, it's not that hard to enable Smart Access Memory on RDNA 2, but that it might be hard based on AMD's messaging to them to enable it for other architectures without kind of rewriting drivers from scratch. And they just don't want to bother with it with the earlier stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like if it's already written in the Radeon Catalyst drivers for this series of graphics cards, it's not that hard to enable it on Intel motherboards, which is interesting.
I mean, it's interesting, and just obviously from a marketing perspective, it makes sense why AMD emphasized that on the on Ryzen 5000 processors, because they're kind of sister launches. I'm almost surprised how fast we're seeing it on other devices. It's good that Intel CPUs can have it enabled though, and it wasn't hard.
Well, so this is the interesting thing. When I was in this, I brought this up about a dozen times now in various videos, live streams and podcasts. Like when I was in an AMD webinar a couple of weeks ago where they were talking about smart access memory, and one of the questions they answered on air was, what about enabling this for other hardware? Should we be surprised if this comes up soon? And of course, this is AMD, so they want you to buy their newest product. So I'm sure he's biased to say they can't just do it easily. But the way he said it is it requires quite a bit of driver work. So seeing them enable it on an Intel motherboard, I'm forced to conclude it's already written into the drivers for the 6000 series. Mm-hmm. So obviously it's not hard to just enable this on other CPU generations besides Zen 3, including Intel. But I guess I still wouldn't be surprised if basically what NVIDIA is working on right now is rewriting their drivers to add this to their products. And then once they do that, you're probably just going to see motherboard manufacturers update previous Zen products to support it as well. I think that's what it comes down to. It was easy for them to add it because it's already in the Catalyst drivers.
Yeah.
But it's not easy to add it to other graphics series. So in other words, I think we can expect smart access memory support on a lot of different products if it's ARC 6000 series. And eventually NVIDIA is going to do this because they want to be competitive. But that we shouldn't expect last-gen hardware graphics to support it. Maybe just last-gen CPU platforms.
I mean, yeah, that makes sense. And it's good to see that the innovation they brought is probably going to just, I don't know, maybe in the future, it's just kind of going to be a feature in every new product release.
I expect it will be. It's just, again, it's kind of one of those funny things, though, where literally the core of what this is basically just allowing them to access more of the RAM on the graphics card at once through the PCIe.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what AMD was talking about in the webinar. Like, once we're getting to 16 gigabyte cards, like, I forgot what it was limited to before. I think it was 256 megabytes. Like, that's a problem when you're like, 1/32 of the card is being accessed at once. There's no reason for this. It's arbitrary. It's almost like, why didn't they do this sooner? And it reminds me of like FreeSync and G-Sync, where NVIDIA added G-Sync first, and that forced AMD to respond, and it created some competition there. But at the end of the day, that was already enabled as a power-saving feature in some laptop screens, and there was no reason they hadn't enabled it like a decade sooner. It's kind of funny that it just took one of them doing it.
I mean, yeah, that is funny how whenever a new feature gets introduced by one of the companies, the other one is kind of like within a year immediately able to respond most of the time. It just shows that I think a lot of it is people just not thinking about how you can improve. Yeah.
And it bothers me a little because of all of this haggling over die sizes and like, look how big this die is on the newest node. And it's like, did we think of just accessing all of the RAM at once instead of using basically a legacy system from decades ago? Same thing with G-Sync and FreeSync. Got to keep your minimums above 60 frames. It's like, well, yeah, or we could just, why are we drawing frames in screen tearing? Why are we doing this?
I don't know, Tom.
Stu writes in and says, regarding the Zen 4 launch, how much specialized processing hardware do you think we'll see from AMD? Intel has been using their integrated graphics for hardware accelerated encoding and decoding for a while, and now Intel and Apple both seem to be adding more hardware-based AI, coding, and emulation on die. I imagine the multiple die design AMD has been using would make it, quote-unquote, easier to add on hardware-based capabilities. Not that it's ever easy, but you seem underwhelmed by their decisions thus far. Yeah, I think I've said that I didn't really expect Zen 3 to reinvent the wheel. At most, we'd see a specialized version of it with like more threads per core, but I never really thought they'd add dedicated extra hardware in the IO die till Zen 4. Or not, whether on the IO die or as another chip. Having said that, it doesn't sound like Zen 4 is going to do that much yet, but I wouldn't rule it out. And I guess what I would say is if they don't add these, because we've already discussed in the last, news broken silicon, Apple had all of these specialized components of the M1 chip for doing specific tasks. If AMD doesn't do this in Zen 4, I will be underwhelmed. I will go, why aren't you doing this? We don't need 32 cores. We would like 16 cores, and then also a different dedicated encoders, and cores for doing specific tasks. We really don't need 32 cores. We need specialized cores now.
I do think that is where the market is going to have to go eventually, just because of physics.
Well, yeah, and it'd be a more. You can always try to brute force things, but I think it's more efficient to just add dedicated hardware to a certain point.
Yeah, and we're seeing that with the consoles, so that obviously already exists. We're seeing that with Apple, so I think it's just a matter of time where we'll start seeing it within PCs as well. Maybe it'll be Zen 4. Hopefully, it's sooner rather than later. I just wonder if Windows being a more open platform than the other ones I mentioned has some role to play in why it wouldn't be adopted as fast.
Well, and I would also highlight this. This was something people brought up to me about Zen 2. But it is nice that Intel comes with integrated graphics. Why doesn't AMD put on integrated graphics for encoding? And it's again, guys, cores take up a very small amount of space. I believe each CCX in Zen 2 is 16 millimeters squared. So that's a quad core, takes up 16 millimeters squared. It's either that or basically 4 compute units. Yeah, that's about the same space. So interesting. I think actually 4 compute units would take up a little more room than that. So from AMD's perspective, it's for encoding, we're just going to give you 16 cores because we think that's the best way to use the die space right now. And I think you saw Intel keep stapling on cores to the point that at first Skylake had half of its, Broadwell, I think most of its die was integrated graphics, and that's awkward. And then you saw Comet Lake where they're just using the same Skylake integrated graphics, and now the hardware acceleration isn't as big as it could be anymore because it's very lopsided. So I think AMD is just planning to add it when they think it makes sense. But I will think it makes sense by Zen 4, in my humble opinion. I guess is how I would put it, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of dedicated cores that compete with Apple, story number 6. AMD rumored to have a prototype Apple M1 competitor in the works, and quoting from Notebook Check, known leaker Mori QHD has tweeted that AMD has an M1 competitor prototype already in the works. He says that the company is developing 2 versions of the chip, one with integrated RAM and one without. Apparently, the prototype is almost ready, whatever that means. No other information is available. So, I don't know, what are your thoughts on seeing this pop up?
It's interesting that this really ultra low power, I think less than 10 watts, might start making an appearance if Apple and AMD are both introducing products at that price point. Not price point, at that level of performance and power usage. And I'm, based on what I saw, at least from M1, I'm surprised that AMD already has a competitor, assuming that means it's equally performant to M1.
Which is what I want to address, right? I've seen a lot of people ask me online recently. Well, I've seen 2 things. I've seen, number one, stories like AMD's already making an Apple M1 killer, which I would say, I think it's premature to say they're going to kill it. And number 2, I think it's a little premature to ask me to have an opinion on something that doesn't even have prototypes done. Right?
Yes.
What I would say is I wouldn't place bets on any killers. Look, AMD has some great engineers. They've made some spectacular products in the past 4 years. So to rule out AMD beating the M1 is silly. You shouldn't rule out anything. This is a competent company that makes great products now. Having said that, Apple's a $2 trillion company that's not juggling nearly all of these other products that AMD has. Apple needs their M1 to be the best. So they put a lot of that money and manpower into that being good because it had to be. And I suspect they will continue to with the successive things they launch, which is just a different type of competitive advantage compared to AMD, juggling all different types of larger high-performance graphics processors, consoles, CPUs. Apple just makes one thing and needs to make it perfect, and they have more money than AMD. So I wouldn't assume it's going to be an Apple killer.
Yeah, because when you go from competitor to killer, you're making a lot of assumptions.
Yeah.
Those aren't the same thing. To me, that sounds like they're going for they have a, I don't know if you would call this ultra low power integrated APU though. A low power APU. That's what that says to me.
Yeah, we don't know how good it will be in comparison yet, but it makes sense they're working on it, but I wouldn't place any bets on a $2 trillion company that has less products it's managing and not staying ahead. Crescent Hunter writes in and says, I see a lot of people, including you, saying that this is Apple's first foray into a CPU segment and that the second gen will be much, much better, and I doubt this assumption. So I'm going to have to cut you off there, Crescent Hunter. I never said their second one will be amazing, ever. What I said is that Apple doesn't see their first generation as a ARM architecture. They see it as ARM-based and the first generation of their Apple architecture. And they're more than willing to grow out of an ARM-based architecture over time. That this is just their first gen of Apple and it's based on ARM. The jury's still out, though. I never said that this will continue to innovate at a great pace. I'm not sure it will. But let me continue your thoughts here. If anything, I'd say that the second gen will show far fewer improvements than this generation did compared to Intel. This generation, the concept of Apple Silicon laptops has been in development probably since 2016. It has been. And maybe even before that, as this was the time Intel's 10 nanometer was clearly not going to happen. They've been working on the chip for years, far longer than AMD or Intel. And in the future, they'll spend on the chip, and I don't think they'll show many improvements. They also shouldn't be given a pass for being first gen. Well, so I wouldn't be so sure of that either, though. Again, I'm not saying I'm sure Apple's next generation will be as impressive as this one, relatively speaking, but I would argue this one is kind of comparable to RDNA 1, and I'd say RDNA 2 is more impressive than RDNA 1. Right? RDNA 1 was their first bridge into a new non-GCN architecture. So while they put all this time into it, yeah, it's the first one. But you've got to assume the second gen, there's a lot of tweaks they can make. I mean, heck, even bad architectures like Bulldozer, the second generation made huge leaps over the first one because they had all these weaknesses to fix. And I would assume it's been the same of RDNA 2. I assume that's going to be true of, the M2 or whatever.
The one thing I would say to that is, I think there's something correct here in this statement by they've been developing this for years. Apple only puts out products that it wants to put out, not that it needs to put out. AMD needs to put out products. So if the M1 wasn't mature enough for them to put it on their devices, well, they would probably just secure another contract with Intel and
which
use
they
that
may
for another
have.
Year. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, famously, there's been products that they said it was the second generation. They said there was an entire generation of iPhones they never released because, well, they discovered they get scratched in your pocket. They discovered that it breaks too easily. They they had to figure out Gorilla Glass. The first generation was scrapped after years of working on it because it wasn't ready. They've probably been working on it since 2016. They may have scrapped the 2018 generation, man.
Yeah, and I think that's where the truth comes in. This is the first. The M1 is the first Apple SoC that Apple wants you to see. It's not the first Apple SoC. So maybe I wouldn't be surprised if he's partially correct that maybe there won't be as many innovations because they've gotten the kinks out, I guess. But then again, they also, I'm assuming, wouldn't have manufactured the M1 predecessors on a super large scale.
Yeah, and I guess here's what I'll say. What we can say now, right now, is the M1 is impressive. That's it. I don't think, and I'm not drawing any conclusions about the next generation. Aside from they're a $2 trillion company. So I would guess they're going to They've certainly been successful in the past, and they're going to have the backing to make another impressive generation. But I'm not saying they will. We'll have to find out. And maybe we'll find out some hints of what it is in this next story. Story number 7. Apple reportedly working on a 32-core processor for high-end Macs. So this comes from Bloomberg and The Verge. But I'll just say right at the top, I have an independent source verifying most of this. So it's not hearsay.
I was going to make a snide remark about Bloomberg because Bloomberg does like being wrong.
I made snide remarks about them to one of my sources, and he was like, well, this one's true. And this comes from Bloomberg. A new half-size Mac Pro is planned for launch by 2022. Apple is working on a new ARM-based processor with as many as 32 high-performance CPU cores that could appear in a Mac in late 2021. According to a new report, the processor could also appear in a new half-size Mac Pro in 2022. Alongside it, the company is also reportedly developing CPU designs with up to 16 high-performance cores and 4 power-efficient cores, which are designed for new versions of the MacBook Pro and iMac. The new processors could arrive as early as spring 2021. Future Apple Silicon designs could also feature GPUs with up to 128 cores. So what I independently verified was this. Right now, coming sooner rather than later, is a 64-core CPU. The M1 had 8 cores for the Mac Pro, and then a 64-core GPU. There are up to 8 in the M1 design. And I'm told that, yes, it is a high-end GPU. I asked, what does high-end mean? Around a 3080, and they said confirmed. That is what they're saying, around a 3080 performance. So I can't say it's 100% verified by multiple sources, but one of my best ones verifies, around 3080 performance, 64 cores. This should go into the Mac Pro next year. Now, the 128 core one, not anytime soon.
I think what this shows is that Apple seems to have full intention of
doing
their ecosystem completely their own.
Yeah. And so, again, I can't say how powerful or how successful these will be once scaled up, but I can tell you they're a true $2 trillion company, and my own sources are verifying that they're working on a 64-core, and that 8-core was really powerful for 8 cores, and they are targeting at least 3080 performance. So we'll see how much energy this uses. It could be pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see where this goes. Apple seems to be coming and swinging with semiconductors, with CPUs and GPUs, though.
And I mean, I guess I'll say this. I have no intention of buying any of these Apple products, maybe ever. So it's not like something I'm excited for because I'm going to get it. I'm just being honest. I'm probably not going to get it. But this will bring competition to AMD, Nvidia, and Intel. It will. It is, if they don't make products good enough to go in MacBooks, then that's sales they've lost. So they are competing with what Apple's making in-house. And at the same time, Windows laptops are competing with MacBooks. And well, I have no intention of getting any of these Apple products for software reasons. At the same time, there's a lot of people where if Apple actually successfully does make something stronger than what AMD, Nvidia, and Intel are making, there will be people that choose Macs instead. This is competition, indirectly, but almost kind of actually directly against Intel, AMD, and Nvidia, and more competition is good. That's why I'm excited about seeing this stuff, because it is kind of a third or arguably fourth entrant into the GPU race, and a third entrant or whatever into the CPU race, because they are actually targeting consumers with their products, unlike other ARM server products. And that's direct competition against high performance AMD and Intel.
Yeah, and the one thing I would say is Apple is far more insular than, the Windows and products and Apple products are somewhat insulated from each other, but they do talk a little bit. So this is going to influence the Windows or PC in some way. And if eventually, assuming that Apple's products kept getting better at like a rate that they're currently showing they could be, Apple could begin to look like a more attractive prospect for some people.
Right. Maybe not me in the short term, but this will pull people away from buying Windows laptops with AMD and Intel if it's good enough. And that is competition for AMD and Intel.
Yeah.
All right. Let us move on to story number 8. Intel Core i9-11900K Rocket Lake 14 nanometer flagship CPU spotted in ashes of the singularity, quoting from WCCF Tech. On December 3rd, the i9-11900K Rocket Lake S desktop flagship CPU was spotted with 8 cores and 3.5 gigahertz base clocks, still losing to the 5950X. We can't say for sure if these are early ES variants of the same chip or different chips altogether, since the Core i9 and Core i7 SKUs are, as of now, expected to be practically identical, with the main difference being clock speed. The earlier 3.4 gigahertz SKU could have been the i7-11700K model, while the Core i9 model features a higher base clock. The boost clocks for the previous model was 5 gigahertz, so we can expect 3.5 base to support higher boost clocks as well, hopefully. And all I can say about this is, I've done multiple videos on Rocket Lake. One of the things I touched on was they were somewhat considering actually doing a 12-thread, 8-core i7, which, again, for those who go, what do you mean? How is that possible? In Comet Lake, you can disable hyper-threading per core now. So they could have just arbitrarily segmented the i7 to be 8 cores, 12 threads, with only half the cores having hyper-threading, almost taking a big little approach if you think about it.
Yeah, kind of.
And so it was either that, though, or two other options. Just call the top 8 core an i7 and not have an i9 in the lineup, which is what I would prefer, because i9 means nothing if it can be any core count in any performance level. Or they would just do this. The i9 and the i7 are both 8 cores and 16 threads. Kind of like the i9, 10900K and the i9-850K, except now they're going to call it an i7, which is what I think which I did speak to a source about this once this article came out. And he said, yeah, most likely they're just the i7 and the i9 are the same core counts, but one boost higher.
I don't know what to say. It looks really dumb. I'm curious.
What does i9 mean?
Is this going to lose to the 10900K multi-threaded tasks too?
One of my Intel sources says it will probably slightly lose in multi-threading to the 10900K. Yeah, probably slightly.
That's it's not like a bulldozer level embarrassing, but it's kind of an embarrassing lineup. Then I don't know.
I would agree. At the end of the day, I don't know. The more we hear about Rocket Lake, the less impressive it is versus Zen 3. Except the one thing I could see happening is this, kind of like what we're seeing with the 3090 and the 6900 XT. Those products exist to milk the people with money. And that's really it. That's what the i9-11900K will be. Milking the people who will spend hundreds of dollars for 1% performance, I guess. I don't know. And which is kind of what this could be, right? It could be literally a 5% difference at most. But if the i7-11700K is below 400 and it does match the 5800X, it could be interesting. I will have to admit that.
Yeah. If it launched for under 400, sure.
And it managed to game better. But again, I really can't see these gaming more than 10 to 15% better than Comet Lake at most. It would not surprise me if they only game 8% better. So it's basically going to de facto tie the 5800X. And the 5800X is $450 for an 8-core. So I'm guessing the i9 is going to be about the same performance for more money and less way less efficiency. And then the i7 will hopefully at least be a decently less money for the same performance, which could be somewhat interesting when you consider that now they'll have PCIe 4.0 support and basically platform parity. Although some people I've talked to in the motherboard space say it's overall inferior, that it might, I forgot what it was, that it might not support NVMe drives at 4.0, that it might just be PCIe drives. So at that point, it's still, I'm going to go, I'm not recommending it if that's true. That's what I'm hearing, guys.
I mean, yeah, that's not good.
Something about not being able to validate something in time for the platform.
I mean, I don't think Intel has anything interesting until Alder Lake, and realistically, maybe even after Alder Lake is what's truly going to be interesting.
Alder Lake will be interesting. Good. That's up in the air.
Yeah.
So Trogaholic writes in and says, "Hi, Tom and Dan. This holiday season, we've seen a lot of Intel CPUs go on sale relative to both AMD and Intel in the past. I know a lot of this has to do with lack of supply on AMD's part, but is Intel finally admitting they need to lower prices? Or is this retailers clearing stock of Intel since very few people seem to want them?" I think it's probably mostly that. I think everyone makes really the time to buy AMD CPUs, price performance wise, was last year. And people hear a year of tech channels saying, buy AMD. And so now they're buying them, even though sometimes now Intel's better price performance. And I just think that's what it is. People buying less Intel because they're not the hot thing anymore. And so retailers are lowering prices to get rid of inventory, especially when they know Rocket Lake's coming and they know that AMD prices could stabilize. That this is the time to push those Intel products.
Yeah.
All right. Story number 9. Intel Ice Lake SP Xeon CPU with 36 cores and 72 threads at 3.6 gigahertz leaks out. Benchmarked on a dual socket server sporting 72 cores total. And this is from WCCF Tech. A Intel 3rd gen Xeon processor, which is part of the Ice Lake SP family of 10 nanometer server chips, has been spotted. Leaked in Geekbench and spotted by Twitter fellow Leakbench. The chip. Okay, what's going on? Maybe I'm to blame by just posting this here. WCCF Tech. Come on. All right, I'm done reading this. I didn't realize how broken the English was on this article. There's a 36 core Ice Lake, guys. There you go.
Yeah, what was the rumor? It was 28 cores, right?
Well, they confirmed 28 cores, but I have been leaking for a year that they had 38 and 40 core dies in testing, and they always intended to launch a 36 core. So this pretty much proves my leak of the 36 core is correct, despite a lot of people being doubtful after months of them not showing it. So that's really what there is to say about this. Just kind of, well, there it is, guys. See, there is a 36 core Ice Lake. It is launching. It is real. 10 nanometer is working better than it used to.
I mean, yeah, that's good for us in the future. I mean, we're not going to be buying the 36 core, but
no, and I don't really think this is coming to consumers, which is, again, for me, disappointing. I was really, when I heard they might have an HEDT Ice Lake lineup, I was like, well, that would be really cool if they could have even if it's the same price or a little more, having competition with 32 core and below Threadrippers prevents AMD from charging whatever they want for the entire lineup. But again, I don't think they're launching this to HEDT. So who knows what they will charge for Milan Threadripper?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll see. Hopefully not a ton.
Yeah, the unfortunate answer is whatever they want.
Yeah. I mean, if you need that product, you need that product. And if AMD is the only person you can get it from, you don't have many choices. So.
I would say Intel cannot bring Sapphire Rapids HEDT soon enough.
Yeah.
All right. So those are the major stories of the past couple weeks that we felt were worth covering for gaming hardware. Been very console heavy the past couple weeks, so kind of focus more on the computer side itself. But anyway, let's get to the final reader mails. Connor writes in and says, "Hey, Tom, listening to your NX Gamer talk, I was wondering how well will the consoles age compared to RDNA cards when they benefit from improved drivers? Could we see the PS5 or Xbox getting a 10% improvement like we see for cards like if it was a 5700 XT? Also, offhand, do you know if the PS5 and Xbox One benefited from this?" Yes, I do know they did. And I do know the PS4 and PS5 allow you to basically write to the metal. Whereas, honestly, the way it's described to me by developers, the Xbox isn't written to the metal. Everyone keeps talking about the benefits of having to write a game for DirectX 12, and then it works on the Xbox and the PC. But that means basically the Xbox is just a PC without enough RAM,
Yeah.
And so it's having performance issues, guys. In fact, what I'm told is they designed the game for PC on DirectX 12, and then they have to semi-port it anyways because they have to do all of this memory management on the Xbox, and there's extra work still because of that. It makes it easier, and it makes backwards and forwards compatibility with Xbox games possible and much easier to do. But there are downsides to that. And again, that is to say, the PS5 is getting some pretty obvious, like if you look at dynamic resolutions, memory benefits from being closer to the metal, and the Xbox just isn't getting those. At least not as many of them.
Yeah, and then I think as like what he's saying as far as this being a newer architecture, I don't know. Yeah, well, there's probably going to be some small benefit to that though too. But I don't know.
I mean, yeah, and again, it's two things. It's yes, they're going to optimize really hard for RDNA 2, and they will age well because of that relative to RDNA 1, I think. Having said that, RDNA 1 will probably get half of the benefits of those optimizations anyways. RDNA 1's a bridge architecture between GCN and RDNA 2. I don't expect it to age badly. I just expect RDNA 2 to age well.
Yeah.
JBear98 writes in and says, is the Xbox dev kit argument real? Or it's not that big of a difference? So I guess I already just touched on it. I'm not sure the dev kit argument, but yeah, the early Xbox dev kits had more bugs, and that was a problem. I don't think it's like, oh, so they're just magically going to gain more performance, but it is a reason for some of the early problems based on what I know. Yeah.
And if that's the reason for some of the early problems, some of the performance issues will get ameliorated on the Xbox Series X. I don't think that means it's going to get, I don't know, like how some people think it's magically going to
it was never stronger than the PS5 though.
Yeah, I don't think it's magically going to start performing 30% better than the PS5 because that's not how hardware works.
Because there's no numbers to support that. People are obsessing about teraflops. Teraflops is not the best measure of gaming performance. In fact, the PS5 has a higher pixel fill rate than the Xbox, guys. Yeah, the numbers are always there to suggest that it might not perform as well. So, I mean, I guess that's all there. And again, if you look at the patches, they've already patched Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and their solution was lowering the resolution of the Xbox. So, JBear98 writes in, I guess again, and notice I gave him 2 here. Let's put our Mark Cerny hat on and think about what could be next gen consoles. What do you think will be the next step on consoles? And the next step after that? Seeing as GPUs isn't everything these days, I wonder what could possibly be holding back consoles if they keep it the same. Maybe some change in cache that literally makes performance a lot better, kind of like Infinity Cache, but the next iteration of it. Adding more RAM, SSD speeds. What do you think? I mean, Dan, like, let me ask you, like, right now, I think this is different than last gen. They're having 0 issues running locked 60 frames at launch. And while they're not running all games in 4K, the dynamic resolution feature within TAA injection into the final image, it looks pretty goddamn sharp. I can't see people complaining that much, at least not with the Series X and the PS5. The Series S is already running games in 720p. So no, I do not think the 4 teraflop Series S will age well. It only has 10 gigabytes of RAM. But I do think the Series X and the PS5, I just can't see people complaining, the dynamic resolution's below 1440p sometimes. I just think that's different than last gen consoles where at launch there was already performance to be desired. I really think people on big screen TVs are going to be pretty happy with this level of performance all gen. So what do you think's next then?
I'm not really quite sure anymore. I think more specialized chips in the console, like the PS5 already has several pieces of like dedicated hardware for decompressing. Cache scrubbers,
multiple IO, different IO controllers for different parts of the IO, not just one for decompression. There's a lot in there.
Yeah, so I think I could see SSD speeds becoming even more important. Like, I don't know, imagine an SSD that's 4 times faster than the PS5's SSD or something like that. Then you truly do just you just have like DDR3 RAM at that point for your storage.
Like DDR4.
Yeah. So once you get there, you can do a ton of insane stuff without worrying about teraflops at all or worrying about GPU performance. So I think that and like dedicated hardware meant to do one specific task is what we're going to see more of.
Yeah, I think this is the first generation where you can truly say they can pretty much make any game they want, bar none. You could have made that argument last gen, but it's like, I don't know, you could have also made that argument with the 360. You could make almost any game on the Xbox 360. It's just, can you imagine how low resolution or how horrible the textures would have to be for certain types of open world games? I mean, my God. I can't wait to see how Cyberpunk looks on the original Xbox One, by the way.
Well, and I will have to say, and this is even just from the PS4 Pro, a way I don't think you could really make the same game, quote unquote, is you really couldn't have acting in video games as good as it is until we had the PS4, even arguably the Pro.
Yeah, and the Xbox One X.
Or the Xbox One X, yeah. Where, like, playing The Last of Us 2, where the facial animations just look like real facial animations.
Even in game.
Yeah, like, that's a big deal.
Yeah, and I guess so, I mean, let's not worry about next gen. Who knows what the PS7 could be? But if we think about what the next consoles could be capable of, which I think is an interesting discussion simply because we're also basically talking about what would probably be in gaming PCs at the same time as well, hopefully, or at least following those console launches. I think obviously you're going to have more RAM, so let's say it even comes out like 2025. Okay. So by then I would expect 64 gigabytes of RAM at least.
I hope, yeah.
And I think let's not worry about teraflops or ROPs, pixels, all that stuff. I think you're going to get a graphics card. I mean, think about it. Early 2022 at least, I think we'll have RDNA 3. So 2023, probably late 2023 then, RDNA 4. And then by 2025, RDNA 5. By then, I think, whatever is in the consoles now, they'll be able to have something 4 to 6 times stronger graphically,
Yeah.
And so, with that in mind, 4K certainly isn't an issue. You'll probably have dynamic 4K to 8K resolution to the point that it is capable of photorealistic pixel counts. That would allow you to see things in the distance you can't see at lower resolutions. Even though you can't tell it's not sharp, trust me, I've looked at some ultra high, like 16K footage shot on an 8 and then viewed on an 8K screen. Like one thing I remember watching was like it was looking at the favelas in Rio in 8K. You could see people walking around on their balconies in this tiny little part of the screen and make out what they're doing. Like people, I think, forget how good the human eye is, that you can look across a mountain range, see someone camping and kind of make out what they're doing if you squint. I think that type of a thing, although how many games will that actually add in the gameplay? Probably not most, but some. So that's the type of things they'll probably be capable of. And again, it's like, probably 4 to 6 times the graphics performance, 64 gigabytes of RAM. But what I'd really be curious about is how much of the die space they choose to use for graphics performance and how much of the die space they use for cache. Because as we move to 5 nanometer, you're not really doubling the size, but I would say going to 3 nanometer, you do quadruple it. If it's 1.5 times 1.5, you're kind of getting close to 4x. And so, if we're on 5 nanometer next year, 3 nanometer a year and a half after that, maybe we'll be on 2 nanometer by the time these consoles launch. And you could consider, okay, so what, 4 or 5 times the die space to work with? Maybe they'll decide to only quadruple graphics performance because that's all they need, add a few more cores for better AI, but then also put a massive amount of cache so you can load a portion of the game just in cache. And then you truly do have, the ability to do anything in any game, no matter what. And that would make development even easier again.
Yeah. And I think saying like a GPU that's not astronomically stronger than what's in the current ones, like I just think there's a good chance that depending on where PC hardware goes in the next 5 or 6 years, because that's the time scale we're talking about, like that might not be as important. So maybe 4 times or 3 times better is all you really need.
Right. And what they could decide to do, like, again, the current gen, at least I know the PS4 Pro and PS5 have like dedicated checkerboarding in the silicon to do it better than otherwise. Like with that mentality, it wouldn't surprise me if they took 4 to 6 times the die space and they're like, we're only going to add 4 times the performance of the graphics, but we're going to add dedicated, hardware for cleaning up the final image anyway, so we don't really need it. We're going to have a dedicating ray tracing ASIC. We're going to have and then we're just going to add a ton of cache so that you don't, because that's the end goal of all of this gaming hardware, all of programming. Put it all in cache. That's the end goal. Roger Kadori talked about this last year in that Hot Wings presentation at Hot Chips behind closed doors. And I've heard programmers say that too. Like fundamentally, at the end of the day, what we really want is a terabyte of cache. I don't think they can do that in the next gen consoles, but it would be interesting how close they could get.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they can't get everything in the cache, but maybe they can get all of the RAM in the cache or something.
Or like what they could do is have like a gigabyte of cache or something, and then have 128 gigabytes of RAM. And maybe that's not enough to hold the whole game, but it's certainly enough to hold anything you'll be doing at one moment in the game.
Yeah.
So I think that should be the end goal of like a PS6, or shall we say the 2025 model of the Series X.
Yes.
Crescent Hunter 52 writes in and says, have you heard anything about Halo Infinite? System requirements, story details, anything, really? Honestly, not really. I've heard mixed things. But I've heard that they are fixing it and taking it seriously. I think that's like common sense stuff. Like, of course they are. This is their flagship series. It needs to be good. So I would say the PlayStation fanboys hating on it being a good game, I wouldn't say that. It could be a great game, and I hope it is. I mean, we like the first two Halos, so I hope there's another good Halo.
Yeah, and I mean, I know, like, I can't remember the guy's name, but I think they're bringing like the original
Halo 2
director or writer back for this one. Like, I think they rehired him. So I think there's some pretty massive changes they're making to the game. They're not putting, I don't think they're just putting a fresh coat of paint on the game. I think they're fundamentally redesigning it.
Right. And I would say that on that note, when I saw they delayed it, people were like, so now it's January? And I'm like, I doubt it. I think this is a late 2021 game, and it could even slip to 2022. That part's my speculation. But when I saw what I saw in that Halo Infinite gameplay, and then they delayed it, I'm like, that doesn't need a coat of paint. That needs fundamental restructuring of half of how the game is, because whether people like it or not, the initial conception of Halo Infinite was like a battle royale open world game. And they clearly decided battle royale is a waste of time and just shifted into an open world Halo game. And then that didn't work out. So they're bringing in the guy from Halo 2 to fix it. So I think this is more than just a fresh coat of paint. I think they needed to, and again, I've talked about this before. There's been other games this has happened to. I believe Uncharted 4 was one of them, where they were like, they basically had to add 2 more years of development because it just wasn't what it needed to be, and they needed to redo half of it.
I mean, yeah, that happens. And another example of it is a less successful example of that is Mass Effect Andromeda.
where they probably should have taken more time instead of rushing it to the finish line, but that's what EA always seems to decide to do.
But yeah, I'm glad it looks like they're taking the time to redo the game the way it should be.
And that's all I can say. Most of what I just said was speculation, to be clear, but I have heard that they're taking it seriously, and that people playing or working on some of the newer iterations of it are like, no, it's going to be a lot better.
Hey, Tom here, jumping in again with an update from after the podcast recording, and that is to say that, yeah, basically right when we got done recording the podcast, articles started popping up confirming Halo Infinite's releasing fall 2021, so there you go. I mean, obviously, you could say that I could have added this after we discussed it, but that tells you I do know how the development's going when I tell you it's definitely not coming out earlier mid-next year. And I stand by. It wouldn't surprise me if it slipped to 2022, although I got to say, I would assume Xbox is going to put all effort into making sure it comes out fall 2021 and not 2022, because they need a exclusive next year. They need it, especially based on what I know from what's coming from Sony that year. So yeah, there you go. Halo Infinite coming out a full year after the originally planned launch date, which I say is a good thing. I have no issues finding games to play now. I want games to release when they are finished, which brings me to actually something else. Later in this podcast, you'll hear us talk about Cyberpunk. And, I noticed after recording this that reviews were popping up for Cyberpunk. And so just let me add a little bit more there before you hear me and Dan's discussion. And that's that based on what I'm seeing, Cyberpunk actually does interest me more than I thought it would. Specifically because of what I've heard about how the side missions are so open and contribute to a main mission with very, very, very many different endings. Of course, we'll all have to see firsthand testimonials from more of the people I follow closely, sometimes I'm a little concerned that mainstream game reviewers are too easily impressed by very subtle changes to the ending. But at the very least, it sounds like a very open game that lets you do whatever you want. And yeah, that sounds like a great game to me. However, it looks insanely buggy to the point that no one's played the last gen versions and they won't let you show captured footage in reviews. So I'm not getting Cyberpunk at launch, though. I'm just being honest. I have plenty of games to play right now, and having a game that's so buggy, every single review mentions it. The IGN review saying they literally had a glitch every hour of gameplay, as far as they could tell. Game-breaking glitches where they had to restart missions. That for me means you know what, you guys, finish the game, then release it. I'm not looking for games to play. There's so many games to play. I have a backlog of dozens of games. And so, I don't know. That's all I got to say is that whatever you hear me and Dan say, and I've talked to Dan about this last night too, he agrees, this looks like a game we're definitely getting, but it looks like a game we're definitely getting once it's finished. And there's just a part of me that can't buy something with this type of anti-consumer, not allowing you to show captured footage. I mean, the amount of shit some other games got this year for trying to control the review day narrative, and this is crazy egregious. If you won't let reviewers show footage that they've captured, what are you hiding? So, I don't know. Looks like a great game, but one that I will wait to be patched for months before I get right back to the show.
But anyways, Daism8 writes in and says, "Hey, Tom, just wanted to ask you, with all your contacts," which again, let's be clear, guys, I don't know everyone, and I don't always know everything. I basically run with what honestly, sometimes when it comes to leaks, it's what thread am I pulling on right now? And so there's a certain degree of me asking people things, but a lot of it is just what do I have access to now and decided to run with, because I don't have time to handle everything at once. I can't know everything going on. So, but he asks, especially at say EA and in particular DICE, I'm a Battlefield fan also, and I'm just curious if you've heard anything or asked around about the next upcoming game, and if not, is it possible to try to reach out and probably find some more info? I mean, all I know is that I believe Battlefield 6 is a modern one built from the ground up for next-gen hardware, and I would expect it to target near photorealism.
Yeah, and I don't know that. So they're probably going to take a 1 year longer than average gap between games, because they've been doing 2 years now, a 2-year cycle usually. But I don't know. I think Battlefield 5 is kind of considered more of a failure than their other games, right? So
they consider it to be. They wanted it to be this giant thing, and I think some of it was done well. The marketing, at least initially, was done horribly, and I really actually think the marketing was a large part of its not doing as well as they were hoping it would. I mean, again, it's like it sold millions of copies, like 10 million, or I don't know, right? It's sold. It's made its money back easily.
Yeah, it didn't lose money.
We play it still, and there's people online playing it. It's fine. But it's not what they wanted.
Yeah, so they needed to take another year to regroup and reassess, I guess.
Well, and I think they feel extra bad because they go from Battlefield World War II to Battlefield 2 to Battlefield 3 to Battlefield 4, all of these modern games, then Battlefield 1, and that's a runaway success, their first World War I game. One of the most successful ones in their history, if not the most. Like, you look it up, tens of millions of copies. So Battlefield 1's a resounding success, well, even though I know some people didn't like it. Whether you like it or not, it did better than 4 did. It did better than 3 even, I think. And this was the first time they were going back to their roots, World War II, and it was the worst one in the past, or at the very least, it did the worst. Plenty of people like Battlefield 5, but I guess it, at least commercially, did not do as well as their previous few. So they feel like they really effed up something. And I think their mindset right now is, well, we were always going to go to modern after World War II. We cannot F this up. And so, in fact, there's been public stories about this. If you go Google it, guys, that the reason I think they were planning to do like a Russian front DLC, and they canceled it. And they canceled everything after basically the American-Japanese expansion pack. And they even reduced the size of the Japanese-American expansion pack, even though that one added plenty of maps and weapons. Because they said, you know what, we're going to get this out. We're going to make sure it's good. And then we're done so that we can have another year of just focusing on Battlefield 6. So that's what's going on right now. They're taking it very seriously.
Yeah, and I think part of what happened with DICE is I think they might have had too much on their platter. Like I joke about this with Tom. Like it seems like DICE is the company that EA needs to do everything, while BioWare, like, I don't know, fucks off. And
BioWare just fucks up every series in the past 5 years.
And then DICE, they're supposed to make Battlefield, Battlefront, randomly Mirror's Edge somewhere in there, and be the engine their entire every EA product is based off of.
I mean, like, it would be like Guerrilla in Sony's studios makes the game engine for a lot of their games and makes Killzone and Horizon. It would be like if they were like, by the way, also make Mirror's Edge and Battlefront and be tech support for all of our studios. And I just think DICE is asked to do too much. Now, they're a bigger team than Guerrilla. They're insanely huge now. But at a certain point, there's only so many things you can juggle and do it well. And I think you look at some of the games they released and they were half-assed. They didn't really care about making a couple of those games compared to Battlefield, but it still pulled resources away from Battlefield.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's what's going on. They're taking it seriously. I can't promise you it will be good, but I suspect they know there's a lot riding on it, and I don't think EA will rush this one out. I think EA doesn't want this one to fail.
Yeah, I mean, EA's not, well, they have all their sports series, but outside of that, EA is not doing super great right now.
Yeah, and look at like what happened. Like Battlefield 1, I believe, was like one of the only Battlefield games to outsell the Call of Duty of the year. And yet Call of Duty's still doing fine. Warzone is absurdly, whatever you say about Call of Duty, and it's not my favorite series by a long shot. Well, I have started the recent Modern Warfare, and I think it's great so far. Whatever you say about them, they keep churning out products that do well. And at the end of the day, you can't, every time it feels like Battlefield's going to eclipse Call of Duty, it feels like they make a sequel that just squanders some of the gains they made.
Yeah, and people like making fun of Call of Duty, but it does really well.
Yeah, and I mean, say what you will. I mean, Call of Duty World War II was for sure, I wouldn't have played it unless I got it for free.
Yeah.
But Modern Warfare, I just started that. It's pretty sick, I think, so far. So it is what it is. They at the very least seem to be able to, well, I guess you could just make the argument they screw up one every now and then too, but I don't know. Yeah. They also put out one every year, unlike Battlefield, where it's like every 2 years. So if they screw one Call of Duty up, it's like, brush it off.
I mean, yeah, I don't remember the order that any of these games are released in anymore. There's so damn many Call of Duty
There's
games.
So many Call of Duties, I don't remember the order at all either. All right, final reader mail. Tactical Gumby writes in and says, are you guys joining the Cyberpunk hype train, and why not exactly? Well, it seems like you think we're not. I don't know. I mean, I'll just say it. I think to a certain extent, people are making Cyberpunk into this big moment because people need a big thing right now. And so they're making it the next crisis because they want another crisis during a year that's been pretty depressing. That's not to say I don't think it will be good. I think it should at least be good. I would be surprised if it wasn't good, but I don't know if it's great or not. And I don't know. It's an open world shooter made by the makers of The Witcher, which I have mixed feelings on some of the Witcher games. And so it's just going to have to get great reviews and then I'll get it. That's it.
Yeah. I think Cyberpunk will probably be a good game, but I'm gonna be honest. I feel like I am missing something that other people are seeing in the game, because it looks like a really, really beautiful, like, it looks really good. It looks like a beautiful open world game. I don't see like this reinvention of the wheel that I seem to be seeing people have the impression that Cyberpunk 2077 is. It just doesn't look like that to me. It looks like it could be an interesting world, and the gameplay I've seen looks perfectly fine. But other than that, I don't know what else to say about it.
I guess, yeah, what I would say about Cyberpunk is I wouldn't be surprised if this got 10s and has like a bazillion weapons and customizability and the whole world's fully featured, and I get it and I love it. I think there's a good chance that's what happens.
Yeah.
I just don't see enough people making good arguments for it. I think I see a lot of the videos being shared. In fact, I'm looking at screenshots right now, and a lot of these screenshots look better than the trailers I've seen. So maybe the game will look amazing. Just feels like some of the gameplay I see, it just seems like what's being shared with me is And it's not like I'm looking for it. So it's not like I've looked at everything. But I just see people share a video and I'm like, yeah, it looks like he has a gun and shot someone.
It looks like a open world first person shooter to me.
I mean, what I'm looking for is how consistent are the graphics and how good is the gameplay? And like, is it just a lot of stuff? Or is it, they did it, they have kind of similar to like what I saw, I don't know, in Red Dead Redemption 2 or Horizon, where every side mission almost felt like a main mission because of how well done the side missions and the open world were. That's what I'm looking for. And again, it's like, it wouldn't surprise me if that's what happens. It just seems like some of the marketing hasn't proven that to me. It just seems like they go Cyberpunk and that's the ad.
Yeah, I agree. And I just don't know where the enthusiasm for Cyberpunk comes from, aside from it being the CD Projekt Red's follow-up to The Witcher 3.
That seems to be where most of the hype is coming from.
Which I know a lot of people love, and I'm not saying it's bad. I haven't played The Witcher 3 because I was pretty turned off from the series by The Witcher 2, if I'm being honest. So maybe that's why I'm not that excited for it, is because CD Projekt Red hasn't proven to me to be a studio that I personally care about.
Yeah. And again, it's not that you dislike them, right?
No. I think based on what I've seen, it looks like The Witcher 3 it's a game that a lot of people like that, I don't know, just doesn't interest me that much.
I think it looks more interesting than The Witcher 3, and that's not so much a diss on The Witcher 3 so much as just me saying for my particular taste, this looks more interesting.
It's a more unique setting than The Witcher.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm looking at screenshots now, and I have to admit the graphics look really good. But again, I think what it's going to come down to is, if I'm being honest, Deus Ex Mankind Divided had absurd graphics on the higher settings, I thought, in some scenes. Almost photorealistic in some areas. And it ran kind of crappy, and it wasn't that open of an open world, though. So what would impress me about Cyberpunk is if, a very comparable game, I think, to Deus Ex, is if what Cyberpunk did is it was consistently that quality with even better graphics, and it actually was huge, right? If I actually could go in most buildings, if it had a huge, fully featured world, because too many open world games sometimes feel like a lot of space filled with nothing because I can't go in any building.
Yeah, they gave you a 6-inch deep ocean to play in.
So what would impress me in Cyberpunk is if it isn't a 6-inch deep ocean, basically.
Yeah. And I'm hoping that's what it is. And maybe I just haven't watched enough to see that is what it is.
A lot of people like going deeper than 6 inches, Dan.
Fuck you.
You don't like my joke?
No, not really, Tom.
Okay.
Not really.
Well, on that note, that's the reader mails. That's the stories of the week. And I don't know. I mean, I guess just final thoughts. We have the 12 years of PC gaming series coming up after this, where I have David does tech stuff. We'll be talking to tech deals. And it'll be a lot of looking back at the stories of this year, our overall thoughts for the year, answering reader mails, going through what we expect out of next year. And, that's that. We're in December, Dan. This is the last big graphics card launch of the year. We did it. And I don't know. Any reflective thoughts here on that? I don't know. It's been a year.
To summarize this year in the PC hardware, not CPU hardware, in PC hardware, I would say there were a lot of impressive launches for
more
graphics
than
cards and CPUs.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, they're at, I think, especially on the GPU front, inaccessible price points, which is unfortunate. Like
for most people.
Yeah. Had they launched these for more interesting prices, I think it would be a lot more exciting. And I'm glad AMD is competing in the high end again to see some competition. And hopefully that drives down prices in the future.
I mean, it kind of reminds me of like that reader mail I got that I answered on loose ends and also touched on in my 6900 XT video, like how will AMD respond to NVIDIA's TI refreshes? And the answer is just actually hitting MSRP. I think people are forgetting just like this year started with utmost optimism. We were coming off the heels of Zen 2, which crushed Intel. No one ever thought it could happen. AMD finally firmly did everything well, giving you all of these cores, great 120 hertz gaming performance. Sure, the 5700 XT didn't take the performance crown, but they were just as efficient as Turing again, and at least competing up to $400, whereas before it was like, eh. And everyone was excited for Big Navi, Ampere. And well, in some ways, Ampere wasn't as good as we hoped when it comes to efficiency. And well, AMD's ray tracing wasn't as good as we hoped. They both delivered. They delivered a performance increase that was better than the last gens. And Zen 3 delivered better than most people expected. So look, Zen 3 delivered, Ampere delivered, RDNA 2 delivered, but there's just no such thing as bad products, just bad prices. And so I think people are just forgetting that on paper, this was the most interesting year ever in the past decade, I think, of gaming hardware, including the consoles. This is a better console launch than the previous ones. This is way more interesting. The games are better. They run better. It's right. Like, don't forget that, people.
And I would say, I do think some of the initial enthusiasm about graphics cards was we just hadn't seen new high-end graphics cards or a new uptick in the enthusiast level performance for like 2 years. So people were, I think, were blowing out of proportion what Ampere did in some ways. Like it was a good product over product launch. You have to remember that what they were launching against were 2-year-old products.
Yeah.
Great. You guys got 60% better performance.
40 more, but more like 40.
40% better performance for $300 more 2 years later. Cool.
Yeah. And I think that's why people are all of a sudden just so disillusioned at the end of the year as everything costs so much more. And people are forgetting, like, hey, look, there's a lot of reasons prices are up. And they will most likely come down before summer next year. I don't know. We're almost getting into what we already are going to talk about in the upcoming episodes for the remainder of the year too. So I don't want to get into it too much, but yeah, I guess that's kind of a closing thought is, look, guys, this was the most interesting year to cover ever. This was a huge year for the channel, and my inability to talk. Now, apparently I said flab shit in the newest video instead of flagship, which I played and I did.
Nice.
I like those comments. I'm like, yep, that's what I said. So, anyways, Moore's Law is brain dead. But yeah,
shit.
But yeah, so I mean, I just don't this has been an incredible year for the channel. It's been an incredible year to cover it, and it has been pretty great most of the year in terms of building PCs. It's just unfortunate what's happened at the end, and this too will pass. And I don't think it's going to be less interesting. Here's what I would put it. Do I think literally everything in 2021 will be as interesting as literally everything in 2020? I don't know. But I think the next 18 months will be just as interesting as the last 18.
I think that's a good way to put it. And I hope that interesting new stuff that's coming out is at a price where it's actually, in my opinion, worth buying. Yeah.
Well, at the end of the day, though, that will do it for this episode, and there will be more rolling out in the end of year series for the remainder of the year, and die shrinks, and there will be a loose ends with you probably actually in it, I'm guessing, at the beginning of January. So yeah, I mean, we've got plenty of content coming the rest of the month. Remember, you get early ad-free access to it if you support us at the proper tier on Patreon. You get to submit reader mails if your questions answered by me and guests that come on air. And then you get exclusive podcasts like Die Shrink that are just never public and go to the patrons, thanking them for their support. Not just thanking them for their support. It's just easier to post things to Patreon. And there's no flagging or things to worry about with YouTube or,
Yeah.
So it is what, don't forget that we're here because you support us. If there wasn't the Patreon of almost 1,000 patrons, we wouldn't be able to do this. And we do intend to do so much more this year if we can hit that goal and then start working on another goal. I don't know. I think it's going to be a lot of change over the next year, just as much as this one, if not more. I don't know. And thanks for listening, guys. It's been incredible.
Thanks.
Us growing. If you think about it, at the beginning of 2019, it was nothing. was like, nothing.
Yeah, that's true. It's weird.
Hundreds of subscribers. That was when the first ended. That was when the first series was done. And then, yeah, it's been a crazy year. And we hope you will be along with us for the ride and supporting us to grow even more next year.
I think we did it, Tom.
I think we did it. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Goodbye.
The following podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother, Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, and select technical editing by Carbon Cry. You can find all of our information, including how to get a hold of us, at www.mooreslawsdead.com. And if you are a fan and would like to send mail or other hardware, please mail parcels to Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 10468, Peoria, Illinois, 61612. And speaking of fans, without exaggeration, the patrons are responsible for the continued distribution of the content you just listened to. And so if you have some extra money, but only if you do, please consider supporting us. For just $2 a month, you get access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to have your questions read aloud on Broken Silicon, Die Shrink, and Loose Ends, and of course, the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who would love to meet you. I am one of them. And at higher tiers, you get access to ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the back catalog of Flyover States podcast, thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts, and other perks as well. And if you cannot afford to support us, please just share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family on social media and Reddit. And give Broken Silicon and Flyover States a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. All of this really does help so much more than I think anyone realizes. If you'd like to advertise on the podcast or a person of interest who would like to be a guest, please reach out to the email address mlhbdead@gmail.com. But as I said, this podcast would not be possible without its fans supporting it. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher producer levels. Matthew McMullen, Telos, Dean, Benny Berlin, Justin Yunt, Thomas Rupp, I Love You, Lynn and Jim Bollocks, Joshua Albin, Muhammad Al-Kawari, Frederick Lau, James Krasa, Justin Pearce, Zachary Martin, Terrence Herod, Brad Medlin, Phil S., Courtney Elliott, The Ninth Dude, Greg Renegar, TSBCFS, Chrysantine, Travis Gooding, The Mechanical Philosopher, Lebo King Kilo, Fatboy Dieselru, Daniel Hyde, Day Kunke, Christoph Novak, Jack O'Neill, Matt Salem, Aaron Close, Juan Garcia, Master Andy Juan, Sadler, Isaiah Godner, Alethros, Telos, Hey There's a Kitty, Greg T. Wanjic, Jacob Barber, Exodia, Hector Santana, Matthew Lane, Joe McMorrow, Jan Rauner, Rubber Duck, Street of Full, Allie Robertson, Eric Jackson, Jonathan, Sean Grant, Evan Dingle, Dominique Cox, Stefan, Original Ross, Hardforum.com, Sam MacArthur, Total Silo, Sil Connor, Michael Casa, Andrew S., Blake, Aaron Keith, Kerry Baldino, Endless Logins, Tom Sen Filippo, Justice Brennan, Ivan K., Trevor Powers, Stu, Alenia, Joshua Staveness, Daniel Nishmal, Franco Frederic, Hardware Numbers, Eric Carastillo, Dark Rain 2049, Lane Perry, Joseph Karaman, Carlos Valdez, Carnivore Bear, Macdo226, Zebra Z. Burr, Zlicky, Martin Porsegji, David Cowden, Ricky Tan, Garanadin, Patrick J.S., Justin Staples, Freddie Canoas Jr., Christopher Foster, Kiwi Phil, Joaquim Hagan, Sarah Light, Anthony Gareffa, Matthew Griffin, Alex, Jorf Loria, Colin Marco, Deke, Cheesy Ramen, Raul Abeneni, Sazuna Maria, Jake Dude 23, Brian Riggleman, Chris Williams, Ryan Deniscu, Dave McCoy, Valco Malev, Messieurs Paul Bogdan, Morton Svensson, Andrew Thomas Summers, Maurice Courtois, Matthew J. Link, Mose from Oz, Mai Sharona, Derek File, Roman, Jacob Stankowitz, Jack Pym, Wakir Khan, JBG, Stephen Hart, Christopher A. Butler, Charles Antoine Fouteau, Peter Moore, Chris Licata, Justin Thomas, Sam Miller, James Kitchens, Kevin Chen, Shakir, Dean Despovsky, Dystopiate, My Name is Nobody, Ruben Marr, Louise Correa, John Jameson, Eshil Dar Epshin, Luca, Anders Bervin, Matthew Lazier, Tim Robbins, Arpit Sharma, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.